On the day my only son, Preston, was getting married to the woman of his dreams. I drove up to the venue entrance only to find a laminated poster attached to the security gate. It featured a candid photo of my wife and me, wearing our dirty gardening clothes, and beneath our faces was a warning printed in bold red ink. Absolute no entry. Do not let these two in under any circumstances. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. My wife Henrietta broke down in tears right there in the passenger seat, but I did not shed a single drop. I simply put the truck in reverse, turned around, and made one phone call that would reshape the rest of that evening. 2 hours later, while my son was raising a glass of expensive champagne, he realized that when he banned his parents from his wedding, he also banned the bank account that had been footing the bill. My name is Clifford Graydon, and at 70 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in the room. For 40 years, I worked as a chief engineer in a steel mill, swallowing smoke and dust, so my son would never have to. To the outside world, and especially to my son, Preston, I am nothing more than a retired old man who drives a beat-up 2000 Chevy Silverado and wears canvas work shirts that have seen better days. Preston always hated that truck. He used to tell me it smelled like oil and hard labor. Welcome, you've found Honor Revenge Stories, and I'm glad you're here. If a story like this one speaks to you, tap subscribe so the next one finds its way to you without you having to search. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, is it morning, where you are afternoon, or are you up late letting this one settle in? A quick note before we begin, some elements of this story have been shaped for the purpose of storytelling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. And he was right. It smelled like the work that paid for his private school, his marketing degree, and the designer suits he now wears to his high-rise office. What Preston does not know is that while he was busy being ashamed of my blue-collar roots, I was busy putting every spare dollar I earned into real estate along the industrial belt. I own warehouses, logistics centers, and apartment complexes that generate more revenue in a month than Preston makes in 2 years. My net worth sits comfortably around $8 million, but I never told him. I wanted him to build his own character, not coast on mine. That Saturday afternoon, the sun was beating down on the hood of my truck as Henrietta and I made our way to the Magnolia Ridge estate. It was the most exclusive wedding venue in the suburbs, the kind of place where the grass is manicured with scissors and the air smells like money. Henrietta looked beautiful. She was wearing her Sunday best, a sage green dress she had bought specifically for this occasion, and a wide-brimmed hat that hid her graying hair. She was nervous, wringing her hands in her lap, asking whether she thought Celeste's parents would take to us. Celeste was our new daughter-in-law, a white girl from a family that Preston described as old money and high society. He had made things very clear over the phone months earlier. He told us this would be a black tie event, and that he did not want us feeling out of place surrounded by senators and business tycoons. He suggested we skip the ceremony and maybe just send a card. It stung, but Henrietta insisted we at least drive by to drop off our gift. I patted my chest pocket where a thick envelope rested against my heart. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000, our wedding gift to them, a down payment on a house so they would not have to rent anymore. I figured that maybe money could not buy class, as Preston would say, but it could certainly buy a future. As we turned onto the long, winding driveway lined with magnolia trees, a procession of Bentleys and Mercedes stretched out ahead of us. My old truck rattled and coughed from the exhaust pipe, letting out a small puff of black smoke that felt like a crime in such pristine surroundings. I caught the valet drivers wrinkling their noses as we rolled up, but I kept my head high. I paid for this, I thought to myself. I did not say it out loud, but I knew that the $80,000 transfer I had sent Preston last month under the guise of my life savings was the only reason this party was happening at all. We reached the main security checkpoint. A tall, broad guard with sunglasses and an earpiece stepped out and raised his hand, halting us before we could get anywhere near the valet stand. He did not ask for an invitation. He did not ask for our names. He just looked at my truck, then looked down at a clipboard, and finally pointed toward a sign stand positioned deliberately to the side of the booth. I rolled down the window expecting him to direct me to a service entrance. Instead, he leaned in and fixed me with a look of pure condescension. "Sir, you need to turn this vehicle around immediately. This is a private event." "I know it is private," I said, keeping my voice calm. "My name is Clifford Graydon. I am the groom's father. This is his mother. We are just here to drop off a gift." The guard let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a bark. He shook his head and tapped the sign stand with his baton. I do not care if you are the President of the United States. I have strict orders. Look at the board. I looked. Henrietta looked. And then time seemed to stop. There on a tripod was a large laminated poster board. On it was a blown-up photograph of Henrietta and me taken from a distance, likely through a zoom lens, while we were working in our community garden 3 weeks prior. In the photo, I was wearing my stained overalls covered in mud, and Henrietta had on a bandana and an old t-shirt. We looked dirty. We looked tired. We looked like the laborers we were proud to be. But above our heads in aggressive red block letters were the words, "Warning. Do not admit these two people. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. Keep them out at all costs." Henrietta let out a sound I will never forget. It was a gasp that turned into a whimper, as if someone had driven a fist into her stomach. She covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide with disbelief, staring at her own face on what amounted to a wanted poster at her son's wedding. "That is us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Cliff, that is us. Why would he do that?" The guard smirked, adjusting his sunglasses. "Look, old man," the groom was very specific. He said he has worked too hard to get into this family, to have you two rolling up in a scrap truck smelling like fertilizer. This is a black tie affair, not a backyard barbecue in the ghetto. Now, turn around before I call the police for trespassing. I sat there a moment, feeling the engine heat radiating up through the floorboards. I looked at the guard. I looked at the sign. And then I looked at my wife, the woman who had packed Preston's lunch every single day for 18 years. The woman who had tutored him every night so he could get into a good college. She was shrinking into her seat, humiliated by the fruit of her own womb. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not demand to see my son. A strange coldness settled over me, a clarity I had not felt since my days managing high-pressure boiler systems at the plant. When the pressure climbs too high, you do not strike it with a hammer. You cut the fuel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. The guard watched me, his hand drifting to his taser, probably convinced I was reaching for a weapon. I drew out the check for $50,000 and unfolded it slowly so he could read every digit. The zeros lined up cleanly behind the 5. "I am not trespassing," I said, my voice steady and low. "I am just leaving." I crumpled the check in my fist until the paper cracked. Then I pushed the truck door open just far enough to drop that ball of paper into the trash can beside the guard booth. "You can tell the groom he saved himself a lot of embarrassment," I said. "And he also saved himself $50,000. I shifted into reverse. The gears ground together loud and ugly. I backed out of that driveway and left the line of luxury cars behind me. I did not look back at the venue. I did not look back at the sign. I kept my eyes on the road and on my wife, who was sobbing quietly into her handkerchief. But as the tires met the main asphalt road, my phone on the dashboard buzzed. A notification from my private banking app, a high-priority alert. I glanced at the screen, a pending authorization request at a charge of $35,000 from Magnolia Ridge Estate Catering Services. Then it came back to me. Months ago, Preston had approached me with a sob story about needing a card on hand for emergencies during the wedding planning. He said vendors sometimes required deposits, and he wanted a backup. I had given him a supplementary card linked to one of my accounts, but with strict permissions requiring my final approval on anything above a certain threshold. He must have run the card just now to cover the remaining reception balance, likely assuming I would rubber stamp it the way I always had. I stared at the notification blinking on the screen. Approve or decline. The image of that poster flashed through my mind. Do not let these two in. My finger hovered over the screen. Henrietta was dabbing her eyes, trying to pull herself together, suggesting that maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe the bride's family had put that sign up without Preston knowing. She was still trying to shield him, still trying to be his mother. "It was no mistake, Etta," I said softly, and I tapped the screen. Decline. Then I opened the card settings and scrolled to the user management section, where Preston's name sat on the list. I selected report, lost, or stolen. Then I chose the final option, freeze account. The phone buzzed once more, confirming the action. The line of credit was dead. The money was gone. I drove us home in silence, knowing that somewhere across town in a crystal ballroom, my son was raising a toast to a life he could no longer afford. He had about 30 minutes before a manager would tap him on the shoulder and ask for a payment method that actually worked. The ceremony was done. The real battle was only starting. The quiet inside that truck cab pressed down like a weight on my chest. Henrietta sat next to me, her gaze fixed on the passenger window, the suburban landscape sliding past in a blur. She was doing her best not to let me see her cry, but every few seconds came that sharp little breath, the kind that hits harder than a shouted word ever could. The truck's engine churned through its usual rough rhythm, a sound I'd always found steady and familiar, but today it just felt like something clenching and releasing. My thoughts kept pulling me back to a Sunday afternoon, 3 months earlier, when Preston had shown up at our kitchen table, in his sunglasses, leg bouncing under his chair. "Mom, Dad," he'd started. "Celeste and I want to do something low-key for the wedding. A handful of people we're close to, maybe a few from the office. Nothing formal, nothing elaborate. We don't want you stressing over some grand production." I could still see the way Henrietta's face had fallen just for a moment before she collected herself and told him she understood. She told him that their happiness was the only thing that mattered to her, and we took him at his word. Both of us. We assumed he was protecting us, sparing 2 retired people from the chaos of a big event. What we had just driven away from had shattered that assumption completely. Nothing about that place was small. The lot outside was packed wall to wall with luxury cars. Catering vehicles the size of transit buses lined the service road. A full security detail worked the perimeter. The guest registry at the gate was thick enough to wallpaper a room. 500 people at minimum, power brokers, politicians, the kind of crowd Preston had been clawing toward his whole adult life. He had fed us a lie from start to finish. Protecting us from stress had nothing to do with it. What he wanted was to keep the sight of us from reaching the people whose opinion he valued. He looked at his mother, the woman who held 2 teaching jobs at once so he could have a computer to do his homework on, and what he registered was a problem. He looked at me, the man who showed him how to dress himself and how to stand up straight, and he saw something to be ashamed of. He was convinced that if his new in-laws, old money, white polished, caught one glimpse of the rough on my hands, or the plainness of his mother's clothes, his whole constructed identity would collapse. So he erased us. Clean out of the frame, clean out of... My hands tightened around the wheel. The feeling building in me had no heat to it, no flame. It was the temperature of deep water in January, still and solid and going nowhere. Pure calculation. I reached over and unclipped my phone from the dashboard mount. Henrietta turned toward me, eyes swollen and raw. "Cliff, what are you doing?" Her voice barely held together. "Taking care of something, Etta," I told her. I moved through my contact list, scrolling past the hardware store, the doctor's office, until I reached a name I hadn't dialed in more than 6 months. Gerald Ashby. Most people have never heard of him. To the city's financial world, he is the senior director of private wealth management at the largest bank in the region. To me, he is the man who has quietly grown my money for 15 years, and the only soul beyond this truck who knows that Clifford Graydon is not simply a man who used to pour steel, but a silent investor sitting on half the warehousing district on the south side. I tapped his name and switched to speaker. 1 ring, 2. "Well, this is unexpected." Gerald's voice was composed, unhurried. "You usually reach out when the market slides or you've spotted another property worth acquiring. Everything okay?" "No, Gerald. Nothing about today is okay." I said, my eyes steady on the road ahead. "I need to move on several account actions right now. Run my verification." A brief pause on his end. When Gerald spoke again, the professional ease had sharpened into something more focused. He'd heard that tone from me before. He knew what it meant. "Ready when you are. Give me the code." Steelhead 1973. "The confirmed. You're in. What's first?" "Stop payment on a cashier's check drawn yesterday. Ends in 550. $50,000. "On it." Keys clicked in the background. "Flagged and locked. Any attempt to deposit that instrument will be turned away at the counter. What else?" "The supplementary platinum card under Preston Graydon tied to my primary holding account. There's a pending authorization from Magnolia Ridge Estate Catering Services. $35,000. Kill it." Gerald went quiet for just a beat. "Clifford, if I pull a charge that size out of pending, it's going to detonate at their point of sale. That's a wedding reception. You're certain about this?" "Completely," I said. "And once that's done, zero out the credit limit on that card. Lock it down entirely." Silence stretched across the line. Gerald didn't need it spelled out. He was sharp enough to read the situation without a briefing. This wasn't a security concern. This was something else. He kept his questions to himself. He did what I paid him to do. I'll need something for the record, he said at last. Bank documentation, reason for the card action. Lost or stolen. Fraud of trust, I said. Understood. His voice dropped just slightly. Authorization canceled. Card is frozen. Anything further? No, that's everything. Thank you, Gerald. I set the phone down. Henrietta hadn't moved. Her mouth was open a little, like she was trying to locate words that weren't coming. She had always known we weren't struggling, but she had never once heard me give instructions. Like that, never heard the weight behind my voice when real money was on the table. Cliff. Just my name, barely a sound. What did you just do? And same thing I used to do when pressure spiked past safe levels at the plant. I said steering us onto our street. I shut off the fuel supply, Etta. 5 miles away at that exact moment, I could read the scene as though I'd scripted it myself. Preston would be on his feet at the head table, tapping crystal with silver, drawing all 500 pairs of eyes toward him. Tuxedo, pressed smile wide, riding the high of a man who believes he has finally arrived. Celeste beside him, radiant, the picture he'd been building toward. He'd be certain the hard part was behind him. The past buried, his parents absent, invisible, gone. His seat at the high table secured. He'd lift his glass ready to deliver the toast of his life, and that's when he'd spot the banquet manager weaving through the crowd with a card terminal in one hand and a folded receipt in the other. No smile on that face. The manager would reach the head table and lean down toward Preston's ear, but a room full of people holding their breath carries sound differently. Mr. Graydon, he'd say quietly, there is an issue with your payment method. Preston would do what Preston always does when cornered, flash the smile and wave it off. Run it again. That card doesn't have a ceiling on it. The manager would not blink. We ran it 3 times, sir. The issuing bank has frozen the account. It's not going through. I could see the color leaving my son's face. His eyes would go to Celeste's father, first then to Celeste, whose practiced composure would be showing its first fracture lines. We require a valid payment immediately. The manager would press the warmth gone from his tone entirely. Your outstanding balance, venue catering and bar service, comes to $45,000. We have a 10-minute window before we suspend operations. That means the staff stops, the music stops, and we begin clearing the room. Preston would dig for his wallet. Out would come his personal cards, $3,000 limits, every one of them already buried under the engagement ring, and the custom shoes, and everything else he'd charged to look the part. Card after card, the terminal shaking its head each time. Decline, decline, decline. And then the panic, not the performative kind, but the real thing, the kind that crawls up from the gut. Standing in front of every person whose respect he had spent his life chasing, he would understand at last that the account was empty. The wealthy father he'd been quietly bragging about to his new family simply did not exist. And the only man who could save him was the very father he had cast out. I guided the truck into our driveway and cut the engine. The quiet settled back in, but it carried a different weight this time. It was the silence of a verdict already handed down. Come on inside, Etta, I said. Keep your phone close. We're gonna get a call soon. We rolled up to our ranch-style house, and the heaviness that had ridden with us in the cab seemed to trail us through the door. It pressed in from all sides, thick and smothering, like something alive. The house was unchanged from when we'd left it 4 hours before. The morning coffee still sat cold in the pot on the counter. The newspaper lay folded on the kitchen island, untouched. It was a place of earned peace, a refuge built with calloused hands. But the moment I turned the key, that stillness was torn apart by a digital riot. My phone sitting on the kitchen table was vibrating so hard it skittered across the wood surface. Next to it, Henrietta's phone was blazing to life inside her purse, its cheerful ringtone cycling over and over without pause. A relentless barrage. I glanced at my screen. One name kept flashing: Preston. Below it, the notifications were stacking. 45 missed calls, 20 text messages. The numbers kept rising as I stood there watching. Henrietta had stopped in the doorway, her purse clutched tight against her chest like a piece of armor. Her eyes were wide and rimmed red, jumping between the 2 phones. She wasn't afraid of the noise. She was afraid of the fury she knew was waiting on the other side of it. She lifted a shaking hand toward her purse, but I stepped in gently. I took her phone and switched it to silent, setting it face down on the counter. Let it ring, I told her. My own voice sounded worn and heavy to me, older than I remembered it. He's not going to quit, Cliff, she whispered, tears sliding free again. He's panicking. He's our son. We have to pick up. I looked at the phone still rattling across the table. That ringing wasn't concern. It was entitlement wearing a costume. It was a spoiled child throwing a fit because the tap had been turned off. I pulled out a chair and dropped into it, my joints registering their complaint after the long, tense drive. I watched the screen go dark for half a heartbeat, then flare back to life. Call 46. I drew a slow breath, the kind you pull in before you swing open a furnace door. I hit the green button and tapped the speaker. I didn't offer a greeting. I didn't ask how he was doing. I just held the line open and waited. What came through wasn't words. It was a wall of sound. "Are you out of your mind, old man?" Preston's voice mangled by bad reception, and raw rage flooded our kitchen. Henrietta recoiled as if the words had a physical edge. "Did you kill the card? Tell me you didn't cut the card right in the middle of the cocktail hour. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I held my tongue. I wanted to hear him. I wanted to hear the man I had raised speak without a filter. "Answer me," he barked. "The manager is standing right beside me. He's threatening to shut the bar down. Every person here is staring at me. You're humiliating me." "You humiliated yourself, Preston," I said, my voice flat and even. "I read the sign at the gate. Do not let these two in. That's what it said." A pause opened on the line. For just a moment, the ambient sounds of the wedding leaked through the soft clink of glasses, the murmur of guests who sensed something had gone sideways. "So that's what this is." Preston's tone pivoted from panic to something colder, more deliberate. "You're being petty. Your feelings got bruised and now you're going to blow up the most important day of my life. You're a senile old fool." Henrietta broke into a sob, her hands flying to her mouth. "We came to bring you a gift, son," she managed. "We only wanted to wish you well." "Oh, stop it, Mom," Preston's voice cut hard. "Don't play the victim. You know exactly why I handled it that way. Look at yourselves. You'd have walked in behind that 2000 Chevy Silverado, wearing your church clothes, looking like you'd just come up from a root cellar. You don't belong in that room. These are people of standing. Celeste's family has real wealth, not whatever you managed to scrape together. I was sparing you the embarrassment, and this is how you repay me by cutting me off." I listened to him reconstruct reality piece by piece. He was grinding the knife and recasting his own cruelty as an act of mercy, trying to load us up with guilt for his own shame. It was manipulation worked to a fine edge. "Protecting us," I repeated dry as ash, "by putting our faces on a sign at the gate like we were wanted criminals." "It was necessary," he fired back. "You just don't understand. You've never understood. You are small people leading small lives. I'm building something here. I'm trying to lift this family's name, and you're dead weight dragging me under. I did what the situation required, but that doesn't give you the right to steal my money." "Your money?" I asked. "Yes, my money," he shot back. "You committed to paying. That makes it mine. You don't get to hand something over and then snatch it back because you're in your feelings. That's theft. You're stealing from me. You're stealing from Celeste." The logic was so contorted, it was almost worth admiring. He had genuinely convinced himself that my labor, my savings, my freely given generosity were simply his to claim, regardless of how he treated the hand that offered them. He wanted the harvest and also wanted to raise the field. "I need you to hear me clearly, Preston," I said, leaning toward the phone. "That money was never yours, not for a single day. It was a gift, and it rested on the understanding that we were family. Today you decided we aren't. You decided we weren't fit to share the same air as your guests. If we're not worthy enough to walk through the door, we're certainly not worthy enough to foot the bill." "You're being absurd," he snapped. "Just restore the card. Transfer the funds, do it now, and maybe I can hold this thing together. If you do it right now, I won't tell Celeste's father that you're a vindictive old man who's lost his grip. I'll run cover for you." He was negotiating, but even his offers arrived wrapped in threats. He still believed he held the leverage. He still thought he was the one doing us a favor. "No," I said, one word hanging in the air like a closed door. "What was that?" His voice dropped a register. I said, "No, the bank is shut, Preston, permanently. Work it out yourself. Go ask your wealthy in-laws. Ask the important people. Don't ask me." A different kind of silence fell on the line. Not the silence of shock, the silence of a predator discovering the exit is sealed. I could hear his breathing ragged and shallow. I could hear the desperation scratching at the back of his throat. He understood now that he was cornered. The bill had come due and his pockets held nothing. And so, he reached for his last card, the one he'd been holding in reserve, the card every child believes grants them unconditional power over their parents. "Fine," he said, voice gone cold and low. "Fine. You want to make this hard. Let's make it hard." He paused, and I could picture the sneer settling onto his face. "Celeste is pregnant." Henrietta gasped. Her head came up, eyes suddenly wide with a desperate fragile light. A grandchild. The one thing she had whispered prayers about every night for 5 years. "She's 2 months along," Preston continued, letting each word land with care. "We were planning to announce it tonight during the speeches. We were going to name the baby after you, Dad. Clifford, if it was a boy." I looked over at Henrietta. She was shaking. Her hands had stretched out toward the phone, as though she might somehow reach the child through the speaker. Her face held both joy and torment in equal measure. "But now," Preston said, his voice sharpening to a point. "Listen to me carefully, old man. If that money isn't sitting in my account in the next 5 minutes, if I have to stand out there and endure one moment of embarrassment because of you, you will never lay eyes on this child. Do you understand me? You will never hold it. You will never learn its name. You'll go to your grave a stranger to your own grandchild." Henrietta let out a wail that cracked through the kitchen like something breaking. "No, Preston, please, don't say that. We'll pay. Cliff, pay him." It was the baby. Her fingers clamped around my arm nails, pressing into the skin. She was pleading with me, begging me to fold, to hand over whatever he demanded to buy our way back into our own son's life. I looked at my wife. I saw the woman who had sat up through his fevers, who had never missed a single baseball game, who had poured love into that boy with a ferocity that made no room for logic. And I watched her coming apart. He was doing it deliberately. He was holding an innocent unborn life over our heads like a club, using it to shake money out of the very people who had given him his first breath. I stared at the phone. I thought about the man on the other end of it. That was not my son. My son was the boy who used to weep over an injured bird he found in the yard. The man on that line was a stranger, someone who would auction off his own child's love to cover a catering bill. If I paid now, it would never stop. He would dangle that child in front of us for the rest of our lives. He would trade visits for houses, cars, vacations. He would raise that child to look at us the same way he did, as a resource to be drawn from. The small warmth I had kept alive in my chest for 32 years, that stubborn little flame of hope guttered and died. Nothing left but ash. I reached over and took Henrietta's hand. I held it firmly, trying to be an anchor for her. She looked back at me, certain I was about to give in, certain I would do whatever it took to hold the family together. I bent toward the phone. My voice came out steady, the way a judge sounds when the sentence has already been decided. "You're right, Preston," I said. That threw him. "What?" "You're right," I said again. "I won't see the child." "What?" "If this is the man you've become," I told him, "if this is the kind of father you intend to be, then that child is better off without us in its life. I will not be held hostage by my own blood." "Wait, Dad." The arrogance had drained out of his voice, replaced by something he hadn't shown in years. Shock. "You made your choice," I said. "Live with it." "Hey, Dad, wait, don't hang." I pressed the red button. The line went dead. The kitchen went silent. Henrietta stood staring at me, her face the color of old paper mouth, open in a soundless expression of disbelief. I pushed back from the table, walked to the sink, and gripped the counter's edge to keep my hands from giving themselves away. I had just severed my own limb to keep the body alive. I had made myself an orphan of my own making. But looking out the window at the last light bleeding out of the sky, I understood I had done the only thing a man in my position could do. I had stopped feeding the thing I had helped create. The house stayed quiet, but there was no peace in it. From upstairs I could hear the floorboards shifting every few minutes, Henrietta pacing the bedroom, sleep nowhere near her. Her heart was fracturing in real time, crushed under the weight of a son who had chosen people he barely knew over his own blood. I sat in the kitchen a long while, watching the microwave's digital clock eat through the minutes. My own heart had finished breaking hours ago. Now it was doing something else, hardening, taking on the cold, tensile quality of the steel I had worked with for 40 years. The grief had burned off. What was left was suspicion. Something about the way Celeste's father had looked at me during the brief time we'd crossed paths months back had never sat right with me. His eyes had that specific shine, the look of a man treading water, with a smile locked on his face while his legs seize up underneath him. And Preston, my son, was ambitious, always had been. But he was not a skilled liar. He'd been too wound up, too desperate to keep his financial history sealed off from his personal story. There was a piece of this puzzle still missing, and I was going to put my hand on it. I got up and moved quietly to the basement door, unlocked it, headed down the wooden stairs. To Preston, this basement was storage, old paint cans, a broken lawnmower, boxes of nothing. To me, it was the archive of everything that mattered. Behind a stack of dusty boxes against the concrete wall sat a floor safe sunk into the foundation. I worked the dial left, right, left. The heavy door gave with a click. Inside, the deeds to my properties, the bonds, and a burner phone I kept for dealings that couldn't afford a paper trail. I took the phone out and brought it to life. Battery still sitting at 80%. I scrolled to a number I hadn't touched since I walked out of the steel mill for the last time. It belonged to Pete, a former private investigator who had run corporate espionage and security work for the plant. Pete was the kind of man who could locate a needle in a haystack and then brief you on its entire manufacturing history. I dialed. 4 rings. Then a rough voice came on. "Cliff, it is 3 o'clock in the morning. This had better be worth it." "I need a full workup, Pete," I said, skipping any preamble. "The subject is the Whitmore family, Lawrence and Nadine Whitmore. Their daughter is Celeste. They're supposed to be major hotel people out of the East Coast." I heard the shuffle of sheets and the snap of a lamp switching on. "The in-laws!" Pete's voice tightened. "Did the wedding go sideways?" "The wedding went straight to hell," I said. "I need to know who these people actually are. Financials, lawsuits, debts, and I need it tonight." "That is a tall order, Cliff." "Wake up the databases," I said. "I'm wiring $10,000 to your offshore account right now. I want everything you can find. Go deep. My instinct says they are not who they're presenting themselves to be." "Give me 2 hours," Pete said. I hung up and settled into the old leather armchair I kept down there. I listened to the furnace hum. I waited. I didn't go back upstairs to sit with Henrietta, because I knew I had nothing real to offer her yet. I needed the truth first. I needed something to fight with. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the burner phone buzzed. An encrypted email from Pete. The subject line read simply, "The Royal Family." I opened the attachment. 50-page PDF. As I started reading, the cold air of the basement seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The report was an autopsy of a financial corpse. The Whitmore Hospitality Group, the empire Preston had been bragging about for months, was a smoldering hole in the ground. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy filed 2 years ago. Their flagship properties seized by creditors. Vacation homes in foreclosure. Lawrence Whitmore personally facing 3 separate fraud and embezzlement lawsuits tied to vendor contracts. They were not simply broke. They were drowning millions in the hole and sinking further with every passing week. I scrolled down to the personal financials. Credit cards maxed, liens on their vehicles, a line of credit days away from being cut off entirely. Destitute frauds moving through the world in rented tuxedos and leased luxury cars performing a life they no longer possessed. But the real blade was on page 42. Pete had pulled together a picture of their recent movements in social circles. It turned out the Whitmores had been making a point of telling their remaining friends about their daughter's engagement. Not about Preston's personality, not about his marketing career, about his background. According to the report, Preston had told Celeste and her family that his father was not a retired engineer. He had told them I was a silent partner in a massive oil operation in the Permian Basin, that I was eccentric, that I dressed plainly and drove old trucks out of some kind of humility, but that I was sitting on a personal fortune north of $50 million. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. The pieces didn't drift together. They slammed into position like something driven by a sledgehammer. Preston was a liar. He had constructed a fictional father to court a woman who was constructing a fictional life. He had sold them a story about generational wealth, and they had bought it eagerly because they were starving for a lifeline. The Whitmores hadn't despised me because I was black or because I had worked with my hands all my life. They despised me because I was a threat to the illusion Preston had built around himself. They needed the lie to stay intact. They needed Preston to be their golden goose. So they pushed for the wedding. They pushed for the luxury. They pushed to keep me at a distance, not out of simple snobbery, but out of raw survival. They were predators hunting for something to feed their debt. And my son had walked straight into their mouths, wearing a suit I had bought him. I went through the report a second time, searching for anything that might suggest Celeste genuinely loved him. There was none. What they had were text logs pulled from a cloud leak Pete had accessed. Celeste grumbling to her mother about Preston's cheap taste. Celeste asking her father how long they'd need to wait after the wedding before they could hit Preston up for a loan to cover their legal fees. They were going to drain him completely. And since Preston didn't actually have the $50 million he had claimed I possessed, they were going to drain me through him. The monthly allowance I sent him, the down payment on his house, the wedding expenses, all of it was disappearing into a bottomless pit of Whitmore debt. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were still, but something was turning over in my gut. My son was a traitor. He had disowned his own parents, buried his history, and treated us like refuse to gain entry into a club that was already in flames. He was ashamed of the honest money I built with my own hands, so he could pretend to have dishonest money he'd never worked a day to earn. But he was also a victim. He was the mark in a long con. He thought he was marrying a princess. He was marrying a parasite. He thought he was climbing the social ladder, but he was stepping onto a trap door. I looked up toward the ceiling, toward the kitchen, where he had sat and demanded money just hours before. I thought about the grandson he had threatened to keep from me. That child would be born into a house of cards. A wave of protective instinct surged through my chest, the urge to run out and pull him back, to shove the file in front of him, to scream the truth until he understood. But then I remembered the sign. Do not let these two in. I remembered his voice on the phone, telling me he had chosen them over us. He had made his choice. He had bought his ticket. He wanted to be a Whitmore so badly that he destroyed his name as a Graydon. I closed the safe and turned the lock. I stood and smoothed out my canvas work shirt. I would not save him. Not this time. If I pulled him out now, he would never learn. He would never see what was right in front of him. He needed to hit the floor. He needed to crash into the reality he had built with his own hands. He needed to be sitting in a motel room, understanding that his wife was a fraud and his in-laws were leeches. I walked back up the stairs and cut the basement light. I was stepping out of the dark, but I knew Preston was just walking into his. I went into the bedroom where Henrietta had finally drifted into a restless sleep. I lay down beside her and stared at the ceiling. The ship was going down. The rats were already on board, and I had just canceled the only lifeboat. Not a single penny would go towards saving that vessel. Let it burn. Let him see what's left in the ashes. Only then could he maybe become a man. The Sunday morning sun brought no warmth to that house. It came in hard and exposing, making the shadows in the corners look darker than they had any right to be. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My laptop sat open before me, casting its blue banking portal glow across the tabletop. Henrietta was still upstairs in bed, probably lying there staring at the ceiling and praying for a miracle that wasn't coming. I wasn't praying. I was reading the autopsy report of my son's wedding night. I pulled up the transaction history for the supplementary platinum card I had frozen the evening before. The digital trail told a story more vivid than any photograph. It was a timeline of humiliation and desperate grasping for status. At 11:45 p.m., there was a declined transaction at the Magnolia Ridge estate for $45,000. That was the moment the music died. That was the moment the manager pulled the plug. I could picture it waiters clearing plates before guests were finished, lights coming up to full brightness and stripping away every trace of romantic ambiance. Guests whispering, reaching for their purses, making hasty exits, leaving the bride and groom, standing in the wreckage of their own vanity. But the story didn't end there. The log showed a flurry of charges attempted after midnight. At 12:30 in the morning, there was an attempted charge at the Four Seasons downtown. $800 declined. Preston had tried to salvage the night. He had tried to take his new bride to the most expensive hotel in the city, probably to outrun the shame of what had happened at the venue. But the card was dead. At 1:15, there was another attempt, the Marriott Marquis. $400 declined. He was lowering his sights, descending the ladder of luxury rung by rung, trying to find somewhere that would take a maxed-out personal card, or maybe hoping the system would correct itself on its own. It did not. And then the final entry at 2:45 in the morning, a charge of $69.50. It wasn't on the platinum card. It was a debit transaction from his personal checking account, which I monitored but did not control. The merchant name left no room for interpretation. Super 8 Highway Exit 4. I stared at the screen. My son, the man who had refused to let his own parents through the door of his wedding, because we looked too working class, spent his wedding night in a roadside motel beside a truck stop. He had gone from champagne dreams to vending machine realities in under 6 hours. His in-laws, the so-called wealthy Whitmores, had clearly not stepped up to cover a hotel suite. They were probably scrambling to protect themselves, leaving the newlyweds to sort out their own mess. I closed the laptop with a grim sense of satisfaction, petty perhaps. But it was also justice. He had wanted to live inside an illusion, and now he was sleeping on polyester sheets in a room that smelled of stale cigarettes. He had shut out the people who loved him, and now he was surrounded by strangers who wouldn't have noticed if he'd ceased to exist. My phone buzzed on the table and broke the silence. I picked it up expecting another plea or maybe a morning clarity apology. I was wrong. It was a text from Preston. I read it. These were not the words of a son. They were the words of a litigant. You think you won, old man. You think cutting me off makes you powerful. I spoke to a lawyer this morning. There are laws in this state about filial responsibility. Look it up. Children are required to support indigent parents, but the law works both ways when it comes to care. You are 70 years old. Soon you are going to need someone to sign your medical forms. You are going to need someone to manage your care when you get sick. Do not force me to be ruthless. If you do not fix this financial mess by noon, I will make sure you rot in a state facility when the time comes. I will be the one making the decisions about your life support. Remember that. I read it twice. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. Instead, a cold calm settled over everything. He was threatening me with my own mortality. He was weaponizing my future death to extort money from me today. He wasn't just ungrateful. He was delusional. He genuinely believed I was a helpless old man teetering on the edge of senility, just waiting for him to step in and take the wheel. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he was playing chess, but he didn't even know what board we were on. He assumed that because I drove an old truck, I must be destitute. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He was about to learn that silence is where the real power lives. I stood and walked to the hallway closet. I reached to the top shelf and brought down a heavy steel lockbox. I set it on the table next to my cold coffee and dialed the combination. Click, click, click. The lid came open. Inside sat the deeds to my commercial properties, the warehouse district, the logistics center, and one other file, a blue folder labeled simply Residential Assets. I opened it and drew out a thick stack of documents. On top was a deed of trust. I smoothed the paper flat against the table. It was the deed to the penthouse apartment in the Pinnacle View Tower downtown, the same apartment where Preston and Celeste had been living for the past 2 years. Preston believed his company was paying for that apartment. He believed he was such a high-value executive that they had rented him a $5,000 a month penthouse just to keep him satisfied. He had bragged about it to anyone who would listen. He had brought Celeste's parents there to put his success on display. What he did not know was that the company leasing the apartment to him was a shell corporation called H.F. Holdings Clifford Graydon Holdings. I had purchased that unit 5 years ago as an investment property. When Preston landed his marketing job, I reached out to his boss privately. I offered to cover Preston's housing as a silent bonus. I told his boss to present it to Preston as a corporate perk. I wanted my son to live somewhere safe. I wanted him to have a solid footing. I paid the mortgage. I paid the HOA fees. I paid the taxes. He paid nothing. I looked at the deed. I looked at his name, listed only as a tenant at will. No lease, no rights. He was a guest in my house, and he had just threatened to pull the plug on my life support. A small, dark smile came to my lips. He wanted to talk about laws. He wanted to talk about ruthless decisions. I picked up the phone and dialed the building management office at the Pinnacle View Tower. It was Sunday, but I knew the building manager personally. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Graydon, good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure? Good morning, Leon, I said. I need something done for me right away. Name it Mr. Graydon. The tenants in Unit 42, B. Preston Graydon and Celeste Whitmore. Yes, sir. Is there a maintenance issue? No, Leon. There is an ownership issue. I am terminating the occupancy agreement effective immediately. They have violated the morality clause of the unwritten contract. I want the locks changed within the hour. There was a pause on the line. Sir, Leon said, his voice careful. That is your son. It is Sunday. They are not even home. I saw them leave yesterday for the wedding. I know, I said. They are currently at a Super 8 off the highway. When they come back, I do not want their keys to work. I want their belongings packed in bags and left in the lobby, not in the secure storage room, in the lobby where everyone can see them. Mr. Graydon, are you certain this is a drastic step? They threaten my wife, Leon, I said, dropping my voice to just above a whisper. They dishonored my family. I want them out. If they make a scene, call the police. Tell them the owner has revoked their access. Understood, sir. I will send the maintenance team up immediately. Thank you, Leon. I set the phone down. I looked at Preston's text message one final time. He thought he could frighten me with the future. He thought he could hold my old age over my head like a club. He forgot that I controlled his present. I looked at the deed lying on the table. It was just a piece of paper, but in that moment it was a sword. I had shielded him from the hard edges of the world for 32 years. I had built a roof over his head that he didn't even know I was paying for. I had let him play the successful executive while I covered the bills from the shadows. That was finished now. He wanted to be a big man. He wanted to be a Whitmore. He wanted to stand above everyone else. Fine. He was welcome to all of that from the sidewalk. I closed the file and returned it to the lockbox. I snapped the lid shut. The sound rang out in the quiet kitchen like a gavel coming down. I got up and walked to the sink to pour out my cold coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it in the drying rack. Then I went to the refrigerator and started pulling out what I needed to make breakfast for Henrietta. She would need her strength. The war was nowhere near finished, but we had just taken the first major battle. We had reclaimed our ground. And when Preston and his bride came back to their ivory tower, they were going to discover that the landlord was the very man they had tried to erase. Monday morning announced itself with the crunch of gravel under expensive tires. I was in my usual spot by the front window, nursing a cup of tea and watching the street. A sleek black BMW pulled into the driveway and parked right alongside my worn-out truck. The contrast was sharp enough to look staged a photograph of the divide between the life I lived and the life my son was desperate to claim. A young white man climbed out of the car. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe brushing 30. He wore a navy suit cut a shade too tight, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He picked his way across the concrete, sidestepping a small oil stain, and looked up at my house with an expression hovering somewhere between pity and contempt. He checked his watch, adjusted his tie, and came up the walk with the stride of a man who believes the ground belongs to him. Henrietta was in the kitchen washing dishes. Her hands were trembling again. She had spent the night crying over the loss of her son and the unborn grandchild she would never know. I walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Go upstairs, Etta," I said quietly. "I will handle this." She looked up at me, fear in her eyes. "Who is it, Cliff? Is it the police?" "No," I said. "Something worse. It is a lawyer." I waited until I heard the bedroom door close at the top of the stairs before I went to the front door. The knocking was aggressive 3 hard raps that expected compliance. I took a slow breath. I let my shoulders sag forward. I let my hands go loose and unsteady. I shifted my glasses so they sat slightly crooked on my face. If they wanted to cast me as a senile old man, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I pulled the door open, taking my time. "Mr. Clifford Graydon?" the young man asked. He offered no handshake. He held his leather briefcase in front of him, like a barrier. "Yes, that is me," I said, letting my voice climb a little thin and uncertain. "Can I help you, son?" "My name is Mr. Pemberton. I am the legal representative for your son, Preston Graydon, and his wife, Celeste. We need to talk, now." I stepped back and waved him in. He walked into the living room, and his eyes moved immediately around the space, cataloging everything. The old floral sofa, the CRT television I'd kept out of sentiment, the faded carpet. A faint smirk crossed his lips. Barely there, but I caught it. He had already totaled up my net worth from the furniture, and he had decided I was easy prey. "Please sit down," I said, pointing to the armchair. "Can I get you some water? Maybe a cookie. Henrietta just made shortbread cookies." "No, thank you," Mr. Pemberton said, perching on the edge of the chair, as if the upholstery might be contagious. "Let us skip the pleasantries. I am here to discuss the considerable financial and emotional harm you inflicted on my clients this past weekend." He set his briefcase on his lap and snapped the latches back. He drew out a thick document stapled at the top. "Your actions on Saturday were not only malicious, they constitute a breach of verbal contract and intentional infliction of emotional distress." He settled into the rehearsed cadence lawyers adopt when they want to make someone feel small. You verbally committed to funding a wedding. My clients relied on that promise. They entered into contracts based on that promise. When you capriciously pulled those funds in the middle of the event, you caused them public humiliation, damage to their reputation, and severe psychological trauma. I blinked several times, manufacturing confusion. But sir, I said, they put a sign on the door. They said I could not come in, so I went home. That is irrelevant, Mr. Pemberton snapped. Your attendance was not a condition of the funding. The money was a gift. Once a gift is promised and relied upon, it becomes a binding obligation under certain interpretations of the law. You stranded them. You exposed them to ridicule. Celeste has been under a doctor's care for severe anxiety since Saturday night. He slid the document across the coffee table toward me. This is a demand letter, Mr. Graydon. We are seeking immediate restitution for the wedding costs totaling $53,000 plus an additional $47,000 in punitive damages for pain and suffering. That is a total of $100,000. If you agree to pay this sum within 48 hours, we will not file a civil lawsuit. $100,000, I whispered, pressing a hand to my chest. I do not have that kind of money. I am just a retired worker. Look at this place. Mr. Pemberton leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He smelled blood. We know you have assets, Mr. Graydon. We know you own this house free and clear. We know you have a pension. And quite frankly, we suspect you have been concealing money from your son for years. But that brings me to the second matter. He reached into the briefcase and produced another document, thinner than the first, but far more dangerous. Preston is deeply concerned about your mental state. He said, his voice thick with manufactured sympathy. He described some very erratic behavior lately. The hoarding, the paranoia, the sudden outbursts of anger, forgetting promises you made. These are classic signs of early onset dementia. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. They were playing the card I had anticipated. They were trying to call my sanity into question in order to void my decisions. I am not crazy, I stammered. I just forget my keys sometimes. It is more than keys, Mr. Graydon, Mr. Pemberton said. You forgot you promised to pay for a wedding. You forgot that you are a father. Preston believes you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs. He is filing a petition for emergency guardianship. He wants to protect you. He wants to ensure your remaining assets are not squandered away due to your cognitive decline. I looked down at my hands, letting them shake violently. He wants to take my rights away, I asked, my voice trembling. He wants to be your conservator, Mr. Pemberton corrected. He would manage your accounts, your property, and your health care. He would see to it that you are placed in a facility equipped to give you the care you clearly need. This house is too much for you. The upkeep alone is a hazard. I could see the trap plainly now. It was a pincer movement. Either I handed over the $100,000 voluntarily, or they would have me declared incompetent, seize control of my finances, sell my home, and take the money regardless while tucking me away in a nursing facility. It was ruthless, it was evil, and it was precisely what I had expected from a desperate man and his shark of a lawyer. But why, I asked, looking up at Mr. Pemberton with tears building in my eyes. Why does he need the money so badly? I thought he had a good job. I thought Celeste was rich. Mr. Pemberton sighed. He glanced at his watch. He was losing patience with the senile old man routine. He decided to apply the pressure. Look, Mr. Graydon, let us be straight with each other. Your son is in a bind. A serious bind. He has creditors on his back, and not just credit card companies. He borrowed money to cover the deposits, high-interest money. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a near whisper. He borrowed $50,000 from a private lender 3 months ago. He needed it to lock in the venue and the vendors because you were taking too long to release your funds. He signed a promissory note. It comes due next week. If he does not pay, he is in physical danger. Do you understand? I nodded slowly, taking in this new piece of information. Preston had gone to a loan shark. That explained the desperation. That explained the panic. But how did he manage a loan like that? I asked, keeping my voice innocent. He does not own anything. Don't you need collateral for a loan that size? Mr. Pemberton rolled his eyes. He was getting sloppy. He thought the game was already won, so he stopped watching his words. He used the equity in this house, Mr. Graydon. The room went still. The ticking of the mantel clock on the fireplace shelf seemed to stop. This house? I asked. But this house belongs to me and Henrietta. His name is not on the deed. Mr. Pemberton shrugged a smirk, playing at the corners of his mouth. He had a power of attorney document. You signed it a year ago when you had that scare with your heart. He used it to secure the loan against this property. I have seen the document myself. It looks valid to me. But if you are claiming you don't remember signing it well, that just reinforces our argument for dementia, doesn't it? You signed away your house and simply forgot about it. There it was, the smoking gun, the confession. My son had forged my signature. He had manufactured a fraudulent power of attorney document. He had borrowed against the home I had built with my own hands to fund a party I wasn't permitted to enter. And this lawyer, this officer of the court, was sitting in my living room openly admitting he knew about it, using it as a crowbar to pry money out of me. He believed I was cornered. He thought that if I denied signing it, I proved I was out of my mind. And if I admitted signing it, I handed over the house. I looked at Mr. Pemberton. I looked at his cheap shoes. I looked at his smug face. And I decided the performance was over. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight, shoulders squared. The fog lifted from my eyes, replaced by the hard, level gaze of a man who once stared down blast furnaces for a living. I reached forward toward the coffee table. There was a plate of shortbread cookies sitting there. I lifted the plate. Underneath it was a small black digital voice recorder. The red light burned steady and unblinking. It had been capturing every word from the moment he walked through my door. I picked it up and pressed the stop button. The click rang out in the silence. Mr. Pemberton stared at the device. His smirk faltered. "What is that?" "That is evidence, Mr. Pemberton," I said. My voice was deep and level. "That is a confession to conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and knowledge of a forged legal document." Mr. Pemberton's face drained. He shot to his feet, catching his knee on the edge of the coffee table. "You cannot record me. That is illegal. I did not consent to any of this. This is a one-party consent state, son," I said, rising from my chair. "I checked the statutes before you arrived, and even if it were not you, just confessed to a felony in my living room. Attorney-client privilege does not shield you when you are an active participant in a crime against a third party." I moved toward him. He stepped back, his arrogance dissolving like smoke. "You told me Preston used this house to secure a loan," I said, closing the distance. "You said you had seen the document. You knew it was forged because I never executed a power of attorney in my life. And instead of reporting it, you came here to blackmail me. You came here to threaten an elderly man with a nursing home unless he paid off an illegal debt." "Mr. Graydon, wait!" Mr. Pemberton stammered, raising both hands. "You misunderstood. I was speaking hypothetically." "Get out," I said. I pointed at the door. "Get out of my house and go tell my son he just made the gravest mistake of his life. He did not only steal from me, he stole from the institution that holds the title to this property. Because unlike what you seem to believe, I do not hold this house free and clear in my personal name. It is held in a trust, and banks do not take kindly to people forging liens against their assets." Mr. Pemberton grabbed his briefcase. He was sweating now, fumbling at the door handle. "I will be reporting you to the Bar Association before the close of business today," I said. "And I am taking this recording directly to the district attorney. You wanted to talk about the law. Now you are going to live inside it." He wrenched the door open and nearly sprinted to his car. He did not look back. He did not watch where he was stepping. He threw himself into the BMW and tore out of the driveway, scattering gravel behind him. I stood and watched him go. A cold, hard satisfaction settled in my chest. They had tried to take my dignity. They had tried to strip away my freedom. Now they were going to lose theirs. I closed the door and turned the lock. I went to the kitchen and poured the tea down the drain. I didn't need tea. I needed to make a call. What had started as a family dispute had just escalated to a criminal matter, and I was the lead witness. Preston and Celeste drove back toward the city with the frantic energy of cornered animals. They had checked out of the roadside motel, leaving behind the stale odor of smoke and failure. But the panic came with them, packed in tight alongside everything else. I knew precisely what they were thinking, because I knew exactly what they owned. They were heading to the penthouse at the Pinnacle View Tower, not to rest, but to liquidate. Over the past 3 years, I had been watching the bank statements. I knew about the 3 Chanel Classic flat bags in Celeste's closet, each one costing more than my first house. I knew about the Breitling Navitimer Preston wore on his wrist, a watch he claimed was a client's gift, but which I knew had been purchased with the emergency fund I had set aside for him. They had thousands of dollars in designer clothes, jewelry, and electronics sitting in that apartment. It was their last remaining asset. The plan was straightforward. They would grab everything they could carry, take it to a high-end pawn shop, or a consignment dealer, pull together enough cash to pay off the loan shark, and maybe retain a lawyer to come after me. They pulled the rental car to the curb in front of the building and left it running in the loading zone. They didn't even bother to park properly. They pushed through the revolving glass doors and cut across the marble lobby with their heads down, avoiding the eyes of the concierge. They looked like royalty in exile, disheveled and frantic. They reached the private elevator bank that serviced the penthouse levels. Preston pulled out his key fob, the black plastic rectangle he loved to produce at bars, as a proof of his standing. He slapped it against the sensor pad, waiting for the satisfying beep and the green light that said he was home. Instead, the sensor burned a hard, unforgiving red. Preston frowned. He wiped the fob on his pants and tried again. Red light. He tried a third time, forcing it against the pad. Red light. Celeste let out a groan of impatience. "What are you doing, Preston? We don't have time for this. Just use the keypad code." Preston punched in the 6-digit code 11992000, his birth year and mine. The irony of that was not lost on me, even from a distance. Access denied blinked across the small digital screen. He tried again. Access denied. "This is ridiculous," Preston muttered, his voice climbing. "The system must be down." He turned toward the front desk, ready to unleash himself on the concierge. But before he could take a single step, he was intercepted. 3 large men in dark tactical uniforms emerged from the security alcove. These were not the building's usual guards. They were private contractors. I had hired them through Pete specifically for this moment. They formed a wall between my son and the elevator bank. "Mr. Graydon," the lead guard said, his voice flat and professional. "You are trespassing. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Preston let out a laugh, a high, brittle sound. "Trespassing. I live here. I am the tenant in Penthouse H. My key isn't working, and I want that fixed right now. Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are, sir," the guard replied. "And we know that your occupancy agreement was terminated at 9 o'clock this morning." "Terminated?" Preston shouted, drawing eyes from across the lobby. "You cannot end a tenancy on a Sunday. That is illegal. I have rights. I want to speak to the landlord. Get the management company on the phone right now." The guard reached into his jacket pocket not for a phone, but for a single folded sheet of paper. He extended it to Preston. "This is your official notice of eviction," the guard said. Preston snatched it and shook it open. Celeste leaned over his shoulder, reading in a rush. "Pursuant to the morality clause within the occupancy agreement regarding Unit 42, B, the landlord hereby exercises the right to immediate termination. The tenants have engaged in conduct deemed detrimental to the family values and integrity of the property owner. All access rights are revoked effective immediately." Morality clause? Preston sputtered, his face going red. "What kind of joke is this? There is no morality clause in my lease. I demand access to my apartment. My belongings are up there. My whole life is up there." "Your belongings are not up there, sir," the guard said, crossing his arms. "The unit has already been cleared." "Cleared!" Celeste shrieked. "You went through my things. That is theft. I am calling the police." "Please do," the guard said, his voice unruffled. "We have the work order signed by the owner. Everything was packed under direct supervision." "Where is it?" Preston demanded, stepping forward. "Where is my stuff?" The guard pointed toward the large glass windows facing the side street. "Your property has been placed in the designated waste management zone." Preston and Celeste ran to the window. There on the sidewalk, piled haphazardly in clear industrial trash bags, was their entire life. I could make out the orange leather of a Chanel bag pressed against the plastic, a tuxedo sleeve, their wedding gifts heaped together like common refuse. They spun around ready to go at the guards, but the men didn't move an inch. "You have 30 minutes to collect your property," the guard said, checking his watch. "The city sanitation truck is scheduled for pickup at noon." Preston yanked out his phone. His hands were trembling so hard he nearly dropped it. He dialed the number for HF Holdings, the faceless shell company he had been sending rent checks to for 2 years. He pressed the phone to his ear, his face contorted with rage. I watched my own phone light up on the kitchen table. The caller ID read, Preston. I picked it up. I said nothing. "Who is this?" Preston screamed into the line. "I am going to sue you into the ground. I am going to burn your company down." You cannot throw my wife's belongings onto a public sidewalk. Do you know who my father is? He is a powerful man. I let out a low, dry chuckle. I know exactly who your father is, Preston, I said into the receiver. Preston stopped breathing. The silence on the line was absolute. He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it as if it had turned into something dangerous. Then he brought it back slowly. Dad. Hello, son, I said. Or should I say tenant? No, Preston whispered. No, that is impossible. You are calling from the management office. You have to be there. I am in my kitchen, Preston, I said, drinking coffee and watching the clock. You have 28 minutes before the garbage truck arrives. But HF Holdings, Preston stammered. That is a corporation. They own the building. HF stands for Clifford Graydon Holdings, I said. I bought that apartment 5 years ago. I set up the company to give you somewhere to live. I paid the mortgage. I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. I let you carry yourself like a high-powered executive while I covered your rent. You own the penthouse, Celeste screamed from somewhere in the background, her voice cutting through the phone like a blade. Her world was caving in. The father-in-law she had mocked, the man she had called a dirty laborer, was the owner of the ivory tower she had been living in. I own the building, Celeste, I said, my voice flat and cold. I own the roof over your head, and I have decided I no longer want tenants who ban me from their weddings. Dad, please, Preston begged, the fight draining out of him completely. Our passports are in those bags, my laptop, the jewelry. Then you better start digging, I said, because the truck driver runs on schedule. I hung up the phone. I didn't need to see them to know what was happening. I knew they were tearing out through the front doors, scrambling across the sidewalk, ripping open trash bags, in a panic clawing their status back out of the gutter, while the neighbors watched from their balconies above. They wanted a spectacle. They got one. It was Tuesday evening when the desperation finally brought them to my door. A steady rain had been falling since noon, turning the dust on my driveway into slick gray mud. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the security monitors I had installed the morning after the wedding. Henrietta was in the kitchen, pretending to read a Bible, but I knew she was only staring at the page, listening for a phone or headlights in the driveway. She still had hope. Mothers always do. They keep a small sealed room in their hearts where their children are forever innocent, no matter how much damage surrounds them. A pair of headlights swept through the darkness and raked across the front window. It was not a luxury car. It was a gray economy sedan, a rental with a scrape along the rear quarter panel, the kind of car Preston would have sneered at a week ago. Now it was his lifeline. I watched the screen as the doors opened. Preston climbed out first. He was wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, nothing like the polished executive he had been performing for years. He looked exhausted. His shoulders were sloped and his movements were unsteady. Celeste got out from the passenger side. No designer heels, she was wearing sneakers and a plain dress, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. It was a costume, and I saw through it the instant she stepped out of the car. They had dressed themselves down to appear humble, to look broken, to look like children, coming home after a hard lesson. They moved up the front path, stepping around the puddles. They had no idea that the camera above the door was a 4K lens with high dynamic range audio. I could hear them breathing. I could see the rain on their eyelashes. Henrietta heard the car. She came rushing into the living room, her eyes wide. "Is it them, Cliff?" she asked, her voice unsteady. I nodded. I pointed at the screen. "Do not open the door, Etta," I said. "We watch from here. We listen first." The doorbell rang. It cut through the silent house like a gunshot. Henrietta flinched, but she started moving toward the door. I caught her wrist gently, but without any give. "No," I said. "We use the intercom." What came next forced me to face just how far the deception had gone and how much it was going to cost everyone involved. Before I get to that, let me ask you this. If someone you loved had been quietly working against you for years, would you confront them the moment you found out? Or would you wait and let the truth do the work on its own? I pressed the button on the wall panel. The porch speaker crackled to life. "State your business," I said, my voice rough. Press's voice came through the speaker, sounding wet and thick. "Dad, please open the door. We have nowhere to go. It is raining. We are freezing." "Go to a hotel," I said. "We cannot." Preston sobbed. His performance was getting better, or maybe the reality of sleeping in a car was finally settling in. "Our cards are blocked. We have no cash. The hotel kicked us out. Please, Dad, just let us in." We need to talk. We need to apologize properly. I looked at Henrietta. She was crying without a sound, tears moving steadily down her face. She stared at the monitor at her son, shivering on the porch. "Cliff, please," she whispered. "It is raining. Let them in, just to talk." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave them out there. I wanted the storm to swallow them whole, but I also needed to see this through. I needed to know how far they would go. I pressed the button again. "I am not unlocking the door," I said. "You can talk from where you were standing. If you have something to say it to the camera." Celeste stepped forward, then nudging Preston slightly to the side. She looked straight up into the lens. Her face was streaked with rain and what looked like tears. She pressed her hands together in front of her chest, a gesture of prayer. "Mr. Graydon, Mrs. Graydon." She began, her voice shaking perfectly. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I know I behaved terribly. I know I was disrespectful." She drew a ragged breath, wiping her eyes. "It was a cultural misunderstanding," she said. "I did not understand how things work in your family. I grew up differently. I was overwhelmed with the wedding, with trying to make everything perfect. I never meant to hurt you. I was under so much pressure. I thought the sign was someone's idea of a joke, a bad one put up by Press's friends. I had no idea it would wound you like this." I stared at the screen. A cultural misunderstanding. That was the polished phrase people reach for when they want to wrap racism in a bow. She was blaming her upbringing, her anxiety, anything at all but her own calculated cruelty. She was calling my dignity a prank. Preston jumped in, sensing her apology wasn't gaining any ground. "It was my fault, Dad," he said. "Work pressure. The merger was falling apart and I took it out on you. I wasn't thinking clearly. I love you both. You know I love you. I just wanted to impress Celeste's parents. I lost my way, but we've learned our lesson. We lost the apartment. We lost our things. We have nothing left but family. Please don't turn your back on family." Henrietta was sobbing openly now. She reached for the door handle. "They've learned Cliff," she said. "Look at them. They are suffering. That is my boy." I kept my hand over hers, holding the lock in place. "Not yet," I said. And then they played it. The ace in the hole. The nuclear option. Celeste reached into her purse, which was soaked and stained. She pulled out a small black and white photograph. She pressed it flat against the camera lens so that it filled the entire display on my monitor. It was an ultrasound image, a grainy gray shape showing the outline of a fetus. "We went to the clinic this morning," Celeste said, her voice dropping to something close to reverence. "We wanted to be sure the stress hadn't harmed the baby. It is a boy, Mrs. Graydon. You are going to have a grandson." Henrietta let out a sound like physical pain. She sank to her knees in front of the door, both hands pressed flat against the wood, as if she could reach through it. "A boy," she wept. "A grandson. Oh, Cliff, look." Press's voice came through softer now, more calculated. "He is healthy, Mom. He has a strong heartbeat. We want him to know you. We want him to grow up in this house. We want him to have his grandparents. We cannot raise him in a car. Please open the door for him." Henrietta looked up at me, her face lit with desperate hope. "Cliff," she pleaded. "It is a baby, an innocent baby. We cannot leave a baby out in the rain. Open the door, please. If you love me, open the door." She began to rise, her hand closing around the deadbolt. She was going to open it. Every maternal instinct had overridden her better judgment. She saw a child, and the monsters holding the picture had ceased to exist. I looked at the monitor. I studied Preston's face, crumpled, pathetic, performing sorrow. And then I shifted to Celeste. Preston had moved forward to press his forehead against the door, playing the role of the broken son. Celeste had eased back a half step, believing she was outside the camera's direct line. She thought the moment belonged to her husband. She had lowered the ultrasound photo. Her other hand held her phone, and her thumb was moving fast across the screen. "Wait," I said, my voice sharp. I seized Henrietta's hand just as she turned the latch. "Stop," I commanded. "Cliff, let me go," she cried, pulling against me. "Look at the screen, Henrietta," I said, my voice raised. "Look at it right now." I grabbed my iPad from the side table. It ran on the same security system, but gave me zoom control. I tapped the display and focused on Celeste. I pinched and zoomed in on her hands. The 4K resolution held firm. The image was clean and sharp. She was texting someone. I pushed in further until her phone screen filled my display. The white text against the blue background was legible, sharp enough to make out every hateful word. Henrietta stopped struggling. She looked at the iPad. She squinted through her tears. "Read it," I said, my voice flat as iron. "Read what she is writing." Henrietta leaned in close, her lips moving silently as she worked through the words. "Almost there. The old hag is crying. I can hear her through the door. Just endure 1 hour of their preaching. Once I get the key to the wall safe, we can drug their tea. We will kick these 2 old black fools to the nursing home by morning." Henrietta went still. The breath left her in one long, shuddering exhale. She stared at the words. Old hag. Drug their tea. Old black fools. The illusion broke apart. The hope she had been nursing died a sudden violent death. She did not look at me. She looked at the door. She looked at the wood between her and the people she had been ready to forgive. Her expression shifted. The grief burned away, and something harder, deeper took its place, a horror so complete it had the shape of rage. She pulled her hand back from the lock. She stepped away. She drew herself straight. She wiped her face with her sleeve, clearing the tears in a single motion. "Do it," she whispered. "Do it, Cliff." I lifted the intercom microphone. I pressed the button. "That was a very moving performance," I said, my voice carrying clean through the porch speakers. "You almost had us." Preston looked up, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "Dad, but I have a question, Celeste," I said. Celeste looked up at the camera, startled. "Yes, Mr. Graydon. Who were you texting just now?" I asked. "Was it your mother, or was it the nursing home intake coordinator at school?" Celeste's face went white. She tried to push the phone behind her back, but it was already too late. "I saw the text, Celeste," I said. "I saw it on the 4K Zoom. Just endure 1 hour. Drug the tea. Kick the old black fools out." Preston spun toward his wife, his mouth falling open. "You idiot!" he hissed at her, not realizing the microphone was still capturing every sound. "You were texting. You are not coming in." I said, my voice rising with the full weight of everything I had held back. "You are not touching my safe. You are not touching my tea, and you are absolutely not touching my wife." "But the baby," Preston shouted, scrambling back to the script. "The baby needs a home." "There is no baby," I said. "What?" Preston stammered. I pulled up the report Pete had sent me an hour earlier. The background check included medical records from the clinic they claimed to have visited that morning. "I have your medical file, Celeste," I said. "You had a tubal ligation 2 years ago. You cannot get pregnant. That ultrasound photograph is a stock image pulled from Google. I found the identical one on the first page of search results." Henrietta gasped, but this time it was a gasp of pure disgust. "You lied about a child," she screamed at the door. "You lied about a life." "Get off my porch," I said. "Dad, please." Preston pounded on the wood. "We have nowhere else to go." "I do not care," I said. I reached for the control panel on the wall. I pressed the button that triggered the perimeter floodlights and the siren alarm I had put in for emergencies. "You have 10 seconds before I release the hounds." I was lying. I did not have hounds, but they didn't know that. "I'm calling the police," I added. "For trespassing and attempted poisoning, I have the text message saved." The siren let loose a deafening howl that rattled the windows. The floodlights turned the porch into a blinding stage. Preston and Celeste stumbled backward, throwing their hands up against the glare. They shot one last look at the camera, their faces warped with hatred and defeat. Then they ran. They ran through the mud, slipping and sliding all the way back to their cheap rental car. I watched them go. I watched those taillights bleed away into the rain. I switched off the alarm. The quiet returned, but it was a different quiet. It was the silence of a fortress that had held its ground. Henrietta crossed the room to me and pressed her head against my chest. She did not cry. "They're gone," she said. "Yes," I said. "They are gone, and they are not coming back." Wednesday morning arrived carrying a silence that felt heavy and dense, like the stillness before a tornado finds the ground. I was in the kitchen sweeping up the mud that had been tracked in the night before, while Henrietta sat in the living room, staring at the black television screen with empty eyes. We were exhausted, bone deep, worn down from the siege we had brought on ourselves. I thought the worst had passed. I thought chasing them out into the rain had been the final battle. I was wrong. The fight had simply moved to a battlefield I did not know. The internet. My phone buzzed on the counter, then it buzzed again and again. Within seconds it was vibrating without pause, walking itself across the granite. It was not Preston this time. It was news app alerts, social media notifications, and text messages from numbers I had never seen. I picked up the phone. A text from my neighbor down the street read simply, "Turn on the news, Cliff. They're talking about you." I walked into the living room and took the remote. I paused with my thumb over the power button. Henrietta looked up at me, fresh fear filling her eyes. "What is it, Cliff?" she asked. "I don't know, Etta," I said. "But I think Celeste just dropped the other shoe." I turned on the television to the local morning news. The anchor wore a grave expression. The chyron crawling across the bottom of the screen read, "Viral video sparks outrage. Family evicts pregnant daughter-in-law." And there on the screen was Celeste. She was not in a studio. She was filming on a cell phone, probably in her mother's kitchen. She had on an oversized gray t-shirt. Her hair was unkempt, her face blotchy and red. She looked like a victim. She looked like a young woman who had been shattered. It was a masterpiece of performance. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, mesmerized by the lie. "They hate me because I am white," Celeste sobbed into the camera, her voice cracking with practiced precision. "They never accepted me. From the moment Preston introduced us, his parents looked at me with disgust. They called me names. They called me a colonizer. They said I was polluting their bloodline." Henrietta gasped, clutching her chest. We had never spoken those words. We had never cared about her race, only her character. On screen, Celeste wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I tried so hard," she continued. "I learned their recipes. I tried to become part of their world. But last night it went too far. I told them I was pregnant. I showed them the ultrasound of their grandson. And do you know what they did?" She paused for dramatic effect, staring straight into the lens. They laughed. They laughed at my baby. And then they threw us out into the rain. They evicted us from our home because Press's father owns the building, and he said he would not have a half-breed grandchild living under his roof. We are homeless. I am sleeping on a floor. I am terrified for my baby. Please help us. We just want to survive." The video cut back to the anchor. "That video has been viewed 3 million times in the last 8 hours, the anchor said. "The family has set up a GoFundMe page that has already raised $20,000. We reached out to Clifford Graydon for comment, but have not received a response. Social justice groups are planning a protest outside the Graydon residence this afternoon." I turned off the television. The room fell back into silence, but a different kind of silence. The silence of a target. Henrietta was shaking violently. Her face had gone gray. "Why would she say that, Cliff?" she whispered. "Why would she tell the whole world we are racists? We marched in Selma. We fought for equality. How can she twist it like this? Because she knows it is the one thing that will destroy us." I said, my voice low and grim. "She knows she cannot win on the facts, so she is burning down our reputation. She is weaponizing our history against us." I looked at my phone again. The messages were flooding in now. Strangers had found my number. The texts were vile, hateful. People calling me a monster. People telling me to die. People threatening to come to my house and make me pay. I stood up and went to the window. A car rolled past slowly. The driver eased to a crawl and pointed at our house, shouting something I couldn't make out through the glass. But I saw his face twisted with fury. "We need to leave Etta," I said. "We need to go to a hotel. It is not safe here." "I will not run from my own home," Henrietta said, a sudden spark of defiance rising in her voice. "I did nothing wrong. I will not let that lying girl chase me out of the house we built." "Etta, please," I started to say. The impact came without warning. The sound hit like an explosion. The front window, the big bay window where Henrietta placed her Christmas tree every single year, shattered inward. Shards of glass tore across the living room carpet like shrapnel. A heavy object thudded onto the floor and rolled to a stop near the coffee table. Henrietta screamed a high, thin sound that cut off abruptly. I lunged toward her, covering her with my body. Even though the damage was already done, I looked at what had landed on the floor. It was a brick wrapped in duct tape, a note fastened to it with a rubber band. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. I turned to Henrietta. She had stopped screaming. She was clutching her left arm, her eyes wide and fixed on nothing. Her mouth moved open and shut without a sound. "Etta," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders. "Etta, look at me. Breathe." She slumped forward, her full weight falling against me. Her skin was cold and clammy. Heart attack. That realization hit me harder than any brick ever could. The stress, the heartbreak, the terror, and now this violence. Her heart, the heart that had loved that boy more than her own life, had finally given out. I scrambled for my phone, fingers fumbling across the screen. I dialed 911. "My wife is having a heart attack," I shouted into the phone. "I need an ambulance now." The next 10 minutes were a blur of terror. I performed CPR, counting the compressions out loud, trying to force life back into her chest. I heard the sirens growing closer in the distance. I heard tires screech in the driveway. I saw the paramedics rush in, their boots crunching over broken glass. They got her onto the stretcher. They placed an oxygen mask over her face. They connected her to monitors that beeped in a frantic, irregular rhythm. "Sir, you need to ride in the front," the paramedic said, steering me toward the cab of the ambulance. As we sped away from the house, I looked back. There were people on the sidewalk, a group of teenagers holding signs. They were cheering. They saw the ambulance leave, and they cheered, believing justice had been delivered to the evil old couple inside. They did not know they were cheering for the death of a saint. At the hospital, the waiting room was a purgatory of white walls and fluorescent light. They took Henrietta straight into surgery, a blockage, they said, massive coronary event. They were putting in stents, but the damage was severe. Her heart was weak. I sat in a plastic chair, my hands still dusted from the brick and damp with the sweat of my fear. I was alone. My son was not there. My son was the reason I was there. I sat staring at the wall for 2 hours. I thought about the little boy I had taught to ride a bike. I thought about the teenager I had taught to drive. I thought about the man who had stood on my porch and let his wife lie about a baby. And then I thought about the video. I thought about the brick. I thought about Henrietta falling. Something inside me snapped. It was the last tether of fatherhood, the last thread of mercy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I ignored the hundreds of hate messages. I scrolled to a contact saved in my phone under the name Fishing Buddy. To the outside world, Reginald Holt was the ruthless senior partner of Holt and Associates, the most feared litigation firm in the state. To Preston, he was just old Mr. Holt, the guy I went fishing with on Sundays, the guy who wore bucket hats and drank cheap beer. Preston had called him a loser once, said I wasted my time with nobodies. Preston had no idea that Reginald Holt billed $1,200 an hour and had never lost a case involving defamation or fraud. I hit the call button. Reginald picked up on the first ring. "Cliff, I saw the news. I am so sorry. Is Etta okay?" "She is in surgery, Reggie," I said. My voice was dead calm. It sounded like it belonged to someone else. "They threw a brick through my window. She had a heart attack." Silence fell over the line, a dangerous silence. "Tell me what you want to do, Cliff," Reginald said. "I want to burn it down," I said. "I want everything, Reggie. I want to sue them for defamation. I want to sue them for emotional distress. I want to sue for the fraud on the house. I want to sue Celeste's parents for the conspiracy. I want to bury them under so much litigation that they will need a breathing tube just to see daylight." I took a breath. "Activate the nuclear option, Reggie." "You mean the full disclosure?" Reginald asked. "Everything," I said. "The gate footage, the audio recordings from inside the house, the medical records proving she cannot get pregnant, the financial records on her parents, the embezzlement file on Preston. Release all of it, Reggie." "If I do that, there is no coming back," Reginald warned. "Preston will go to prison. Celeste will be destroyed publicly. This is the end of your family." "My family ended when that brick came through the window," I said. "Do it, Reggie. Call the station. Get me on air. I want to look them in the eye when I end them." "Consider it done," Reginald said. "I will meet you at the hospital in 20 minutes. Have your suit ready, Cliff. We have a war to win." I hung up. I stared at the doors to the surgery wing. "Hold on, Etta," I whispered. "Just hold on. I'm going to make sure they never hurt you again." Thursday morning came, carrying the sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of hospital machinery. I sat in the cardiac intensive care unit, waiting room eyes fixed on the television mounted in the corner. Henrietta was alive, but she was fragile. Her heart was beating a delicate rhythm held in place by wires and medication. I had not slept. I was still in the same clothes from the day before, dusted with grit from the brick that had torn through our window. But tucked inside my jacket pocket sat a fresh handkerchief and a sense of purpose that burned hotter than the sun climbing over the city skyline. On the screen, the local morning talk show was getting underway. The host, a woman with perfect hair and a carefully sympathetic tilt to her head, introduced her guests. And there they were, Preston and Celeste, seated on a beige sofa, holding hands looking like survivors of some terrible catastrophe. Celeste had on a white dress that was slightly too large for her, making her appear small and frail. No makeup. Eyes wide and glistening. Preston wore a simple button-down sleeves rolled to the elbow, carrying himself like a man crushed beneath an impossible weight. They were masterful. They were painting the portrait of a young couple hounded by a hateful, prejudiced family. They described the eviction in the rain. They described being without a home. Then they got to the baby. "We just want to give our unborn child a safe place to come home to," Celeste murmured to the camera, one hand moving slowly across her flat stomach. "We are terrified the stress is going to harm the pregnancy. We have nothing left. Our bank accounts were frozen by Press's father. We are living off the kindness of strangers." The host nodded, dabbing at the corner of her eye. "It is truly heartbreaking," she said. "And you have launched a GoFundMe campaign, is that right?" "Yes," Preston said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are trying to raise $50,000, just enough for a small apartment and medical expenses for the baby. We just want to start over away from the toxicity." I glanced at the ticker crawling across the bottom of the screen. The campaign had already pulled in $35,000. People were giving money they could not spare to a man who wore a Breitling Navy timer and a woman who owned 3 Chanel Classic flap bags. They were funding a fiction. Then the host touched her earpiece. Something shifted in her expression, confusion first, then a flicker of intrigue. "We have a development," she said. "We reached out to Clifford Graydon for comment yesterday and did not hear back directly, but his legal representative has just arrived at the studio and has asked to join the conversation." Preston frowned, leaning forward. "My father does not have a legal representative," he said. "He is a retired steelworker. He does not even have a lawyer." The camera swung toward the side of the stage. The curtain parted and Reginald Holt walked out. He was not in his fishing bucket hat today. He had on a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that cost more than Preston's car. A leather portfolio was tucked under one arm. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had dismantled corporations and senators before the morning coffee went cold. He settled into the empty chair across from Preston and Celeste. Preston stared at him. Recognition moved across his face. "Mr. Holt," he said, bewildered. "The guy from the fishing trips." "Good morning, Preston," Reginald said calmly. "Good morning, Celeste." "What are you doing here?" Preston demanded. "This is a private interview. You are my dad's fishing buddy. You are a nobody." "I am a senior partner at Holt & Associates," Reginald said, his voice carrying cleanly to every corner of the studio. "And I am here to represent Clifford and Henrietta Graydon. I am also here to present evidence concerning the allegations made on this program and across social media." Celeste let out a laugh, nervous, high-pitched. "Evidence?" she scoffed. "What evidence that his parents hate me, that they threw a pregnant woman out into the rain?" Reginald did not look at her. He looked at the host. "May I?" he asked, holding up a USB drive. The host nodded toward the production booth. Reginald plugged the drive into the laptop on the coffee table, connected to the large screen behind them. "Exhibit A," Reginald said. "You claim that Mr. and Mrs. Graydon excluded themselves from the wedding because they are antisocial and despise your wife. You claim you wanted them present." The screen came to life. It was the security footage from the gate of Magnolia Ridge Estate, high definition. It showed my old truck pulling up to the entrance, the security guard pointing toward a sign, and then the image zoomed in, tight on the sign itself. The audience gasped. The red lettering was unmistakable. Warning: do not admit these two people. They will ruin the luxury aesthetic. Preston went pale. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "That is a forgery," he finally stammered. "That is photoshopped." "We have the affidavit from the security company," Reginald said smoothly, "and the invoice you paid for having the sign printed." He clicked the button. "Exhibit B," Reginald continued. "You claim that Clifford Graydon is a cruel man who cut you off without cause. You claim he despises his own grandchild." The audio began to play. It was the recording from my kitchen. Preston's voice filled the studio, loud and unmistakable. "If that money is not in my account in the next 5 minutes, you will never see this child. You will never hold it. You will never know its name. You will die without ever meeting your grandchild." The studio went silent. Every drop of sympathy in that room evaporated on the spot. The host recoiled from Preston, as though he had become something dangerous. "That was blackmail," Reginald stated. You attempted to extort $50,000 from your own father using an unborn child as a hostage. Celeste seized Preston's arm. Her eyes swept the room, searching for any way out. "Stop this!" she shrieked. "This is illegal. You cannot play private conversations. We are leaving." "Sit down, Celeste," Reginald said. His voice never rose, but it landed with the full weight of a gavel. "Because we are not done. There is one final piece of evidence." He clicked the button again. "Exhibit C," Reginald said. "The medical records." A document filled the screen. It was a surgical report from a private clinic in Atlanta dated 2 years ago. "You have raised $35,000 from the public on the claim that you are pregnant and homeless," Reginald said. "You have stated repeatedly on this program and in your video that Clifford Graydon evicted a pregnant woman." He pointed at the screen. "This is a medical record for a laparoscopic bilateral tubal ligation performed on Celeste Whitmore. For those without a medical background, that means her tubes were tied. A permanent sterilization procedure. The silence inside that studio was total. The kind of silence that descends after a detonation, that breathless gap before the screaming begins." Preston turned his head slowly toward his wife. His face was a mask of bafflement and creeping dread. "What is that?" he whispered. Celeste was shaking her head, the color fleeing her face entirely. "That is fake," she whispered. "That is a lie." "It is certified," Reginald said. "We also have the billing record charged to your father's credit card." Preston got to his feet. He stared at the screen. He stared at the date. "2 years ago," he said, his voice climbing. "We have been trying for a baby for a year. You told me we were trying. You told me you were taking vitamins. You showed me the test." "I bought the test online," Celeste blurted out. Then she slammed her hand over her mouth, the weight of what she had just confessed hitting her all at once. The audience exploded. People rose to their feet shouting, "Liar, fraud, thief!" Preston stared at her. The truth landed on him like something physical. He had burned his relationship with his parents to the ground. He had dragged their names through humiliation. He had surrendered his inheritance. He had made himself a pariah, and he had done every last bit of it for a woman who had been deceiving him about the one thing he wanted most. There was no baby. There was no dynasty. Just a lie stacked on top of another lie. "You lied to me," Preston screamed. "You let me blackmail my father over a child that doesn't even exist." Celeste looked at the cameras. She looked at the hostile crowd. She looked at Reginald Holt, who was watching her with cold detachment. She had no moves left, no cards remaining to play. So, she did the only thing a coward does when the walls close in. Her eyes rolled back. Her knees gave. She crumpled to the floor in a heap of white fabric. It was a staged faint. I knew it. Reginald knew it. Even the host knew it. But the cameras kept rolling. "Cut the feed!" the host yelled. Too late. It was live. Millions had just watched the Whitmore-Graydon fraud come apart at the seams. Reginald rose, straightened his jacket, and looked directly into the camera. "To anyone who donated to the GoFundMe," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "we have already contacted the platform. The funds have been frozen and will be refunded. This fraud is over." He turned and walked off the set, leaving Preston standing over his unconscious wife amid the wreckage of his own making. I sat in the hospital waiting room and released a breath I felt like I had been holding for days. A hand came to rest on my shoulder. A nurse stood beside me. "Mr. Graydon," she said, "your wife is awake. She's asking for you." I stood up. My joints popped. I felt 10 years older and 10 pounds lighter at the same time. I moved toward the ICU doors. I didn't glance back at the television. I had no need to watch the aftermath unfold. I already knew what was coming. The lawsuits, the divorce, the criminal charges. My son was alone now, truly alone. He had wanted independence. He had wanted distance from me. He got exactly what he asked for. The fallout from that broadcast was swift and absolute, like a structure coming down under a controlled demolition. Within 3 hours of the credits rolling, Preston received an email from his marketing firm. They didn't even extend the courtesy of a phone call. The subject line read simply, "Termination of contract effective immediately." They cited a violation of the company's code of conduct and the reputational damage his public fraud had caused. He was toxic. Nobody wants a liar and a blackmailer anywhere near their brand. Celeste didn't wait for an eviction notice from the sublet she had scrambled into. She packed her bags the moment the cameras cut. She fled back to her parents' house in Virginia, blaming Preston for the humiliation, blaming him for the fake pregnancy scandal, blaming him for the absence of money. She left a note on the counter saying she was filing for an annulment based on fraud. The rats weren't just abandoning the ship, they were tearing into each other on the way down. Preston was alone for the first time in his life. No safety net. No mother to put a meal in front of him. No father to wire him cash. No wife to prop up his ego. No job to feed his arrogance. He sat in his rental car in a liquor store parking lot, drinking cheap vodka straight from the bottle. The burn didn't dull the pain. It fed the rage. He stewed in a poisonous broth of self-pity and entitlement. He did not see his own choices as the source of his ruin. He saw me. He saw the father who had dared to refuse him. He saw the man who had kept millions tucked away while he scrambled to maintain appearances. He started the car. His vision was blurred, his coordination gone, but his anger gave him a terrifying narrowed focus. He drove through the suburbs, drifting across the center line, blowing red lights guided by a singular destructive impulse. He was heading to the root of his misery. He was coming to make me pay for his own sins. It was 2 a.m. when I heard the screech of tires on the asphalt below. I was awake sitting in the darkened upstairs bedroom, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor I had purchased for Henrietta since she came home from the hospital. She was sleeping sedated and still with no idea the storm had returned. I crossed to the window and looked down. Preston's car sat half-cocked on the lawn, the tires churning up the grass Henrietta had planted last spring. The engine was still running, headlights slashing through the dark like spotlights trained on a crime scene. Preston lurched out of the driver's side, nearly going down before he caught himself on the doorframe. In his hand was a metal baseball bat, the same bat I had bought him for Little League when he was 10 years old. He had kept it in his trunk all these years, not for sport, he said, but for protection. Now he was swinging it against his own history. He walked toward my truck, the old 2000 Chevy Silverado. The truck he despised. The truck he called an eyesore. The truck that had hauled the steel and the tools that built his entire life. He swung. The sound of metal meeting metal rang through that quiet neighborhood like a church bell struck in hell. He caught the front fender, folding a deep dent into the steel. He swung again and took out the headlight. Glass shattered, raining down across the driveway. I watched from above, feeling a strange remove. Not anger, not fear. I was witnessing a tantrum of biblical proportions. "You did this!" Preston screamed, his voice raw and slurred. "You did this to me." He swung at the windshield, and the safety glass spiderwebbed under the blow, going white and opaque. "You have millions!" he yelled, hammering the hood again and again. "You have millions of dollars, and you let me live like a peasant. You let me struggle. You let me humiliate myself. It is your fault." He was crying now, great heaving sobs that racked his whole body, but the bat kept moving. He circled the truck, caving in the doors, snapping the side mirrors, shattering the taillights. He was trying to kill the truck because he couldn't reach me. He was trying to destroy the symbol of the labor he had always despised because he understood too late that the work had been worth more than he ever was. "You selfish old man!" he screamed, glaring up at the house. "You hid it! You hid it all. You let them laugh at me. You let me lose everything. I hate you. I hate your money. I hate this house." He swung one final time, with everything he had left. The bat bounced off the heavy steel bumper, the vibration rattling through his hands and up his arms. He dropped it. He sank to his knees in the driveway, surrounded by broken glass and his broken life. He buried his face in his hands and howled, pure agony. The agony of a man who knows he is wrong, but cannot bring himself to say it, so he lays the blame on the only person who ever truly loved him. I turned away from the window. I did not go down there. I didn't step outside to comfort him, to take the bat away to tell him to stop. That was what the old Clifford would have done. The old Clifford would have tried to fix it. The new Clifford walked to the nightstand and picked up the phone. I dialed 911. "Emergency services," the operator answered. "I would like to report a crime in progress." I said, my voice steady. "There is a man in my driveway destroying my vehicle. He is intoxicated. He is armed with a baseball bat, and he is screaming threats." "Do you know the man, sir?" the operator asked. I paused for just a fraction of a second. I glanced at the family photo on the dresser, taken the day Preston graduated high school. He looked so full of promise then. So unbroken. "Yes," I said. "I know him. but he is a stranger to me now. Please send officers right away. My wife is recovering from a heart attack and I fear for her safety." I stayed on the line until the blue and red lights began strobing against the bedroom walls. I watched 2 patrol cars pull up and block the driveway. 4 officers climbed out with their hands resting on their holsters. Preston was still on his knees, muttering into the ground. He didn't even register their approach until they were on top of him. "Drop the weapon, hands on your head." Preston looked up, blinking in the wash of the police lights. He had the dazed look of a man roused from a deep sleep. He tried to get to his feet, but the alcohol had stolen his legs out from under him. He staggered toward the officers. "That's my dad's truck," he slurred, jabbing a finger at the wreckage. He owes me everything." "Sir, get on the ground," one officer ordered. Preston lurched forward to explain maybe, or to fight. It made no difference. Officers don't gamble with drunk men who have baseball bats within reach. They took him down hard. His face met the gravel. I saw him wince. I watched them wrench his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. They hauled him upright. He was dead weight, barely standing. He found the window and found me standing behind it. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, help me. Tell them it's okay." I didn't move. I didn't gesture. I just stood there and watched. They put him in the back of the patrol car. He kicked the window from inside, screaming my name, screaming that he was sorry, screaming that he hated me, screaming for his mother. One of the officers came to the front door and knocked. I went downstairs and pulled it open. The night air carried the smell of gasoline and broken glass. "Mr. Graydon," the officer said. "Yes. We have the suspect in custody. He is intoxicated. We are charging him with driving under the influence, trespassing, vandalism, and disorderly conduct. Given the extent of the damage to the vehicle, this is a felony vandalism charge." I nodded. "I understand." "He claims he is your son," the officer said, studying me. "He is asking whether you want to post bail or drop the charges. He says it is a family matter." I looked past the officer toward the patrol car. I could make out Press's silhouette in the back seat, straining against the restraints. "He broke my window 2 days ago," I said. "He triggered my wife's heart attack. Tonight he came back with a weapon. This is not a family dispute, officer. This is a home invasion. I am pressing charges to the fullest extent of the law." "And bail?" the officer asked. "The magistrate will set it in the morning. He will probably call you." "Tell him not to bother," I said. The officer looked taken aback. "Sir, he is going to the county jail. It is not a pleasant place." "I know," I said. "I know exactly what kind of place it is." I held the officer's gaze. "He needs a quiet place to think. A place where nobody pays his bills, where nobody cleans up his mess, and where he has to sit across from the man in the mirror. Don't let him out. Let him stay. Let him sober up. Let him learn that actions carry consequences." The officer nodded slowly, touching the brim of his cap. "Understood, Mr. Graydon. We'll take him in." I watched the cars move away down the street, the lights dissolving into the dark, leaving everything still and silent again. I turned to look at my truck. It was destroyed. The hood was folded in on itself. The glass was gone. The metal was bent and crumpled. A total loss. I walked over and drew my hand along the caved fender. It was just a truck, steel and rubber. It could be replaced. But the boy who used to ride in the passenger seat begging me to drive faster, the boy who used to fall asleep across the back seat on camping trips, that boy was long gone. He had been gone for a long time. Tonight I simply stopped pretending otherwise. I went back inside and locked the door. I looked in on Henrietta. She was still sleeping, her heart monitor ticking out a steady, strong rhythm. I settled into the chair beside her bed and let my eyes close. The house was safe. The threat had passed. My son was in a cage, and for the first time in years, something in my chest finally let go. The war was over. The rebuilding could begin. The visiting room at the county jail smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a scent that lodged in the back of your throat and stayed there after you left. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the concrete floor, looking through a scratched sheet of thick plexiglass. It had been 7 days since the police took my son away. 7 days since he destroyed my truck and the last shreds of my patience. When the guard finally walked him in, I barely recognized the man shuffling toward the booth. Preston wore an orange jumpsuit that hung off his frame like it belonged to someone larger. He had dropped 10 pounds in a week. His complexion was hollow, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, and his hands trembled as he reached for the phone on the wall. He was a ghost of the arrogant executive who had stood on my porch demanding to be let in. Every trace of that swagger had been stripped away, replaced by raw, exposed desperation. He lifted the receiver and pressed it to his ear. I did the same. "Dad." He choked his voice, fracturing. "Oh God. Dad, you came. You have to get me out of here. Please. It is a nightmare in here. The other inmates, they know who I am. They saw the news. I cannot survive in here." I watched him cry. I watched the tears cut paths through the stubble on his face. I felt a pull of pity distant, though, like watching a stranger grieve through a screen. "I am sorry, Dad." He pressed his forehead to the glass and wept. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. It was Celeste. She warped my thinking. She made me believe we were above everyone else. She pushed me into it, but I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You have the money, I know you do. Just post bail. Get me a lawyer. We can fix this. I will pay you back every cent. I swear I'll work in the warehouse. I will do anything. Just don't leave me here." He was still running the same play. Even in a cage, he was bargaining. Still blaming the woman he chose. Still pledging things he couldn't deliver. He still believed this was a transaction, that if he found the right combination of words, the magic wallet would spring open and the consequences would evaporate. I reached into the canvas bag I had brought. I did not take out a checkbook. I did not produce bail papers. I pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape and held it flat against the glass so he could see it clearly. "I am not here to bail you out, Preston," I said, my voice flat through the receiver. "I am here to tell you why you are never getting out." Preston's brow creased. He wiped his nose on his sleeve. "What is that? Is that the deed to the house? Are you selling it to help me?" "No, son," I said. "This is your personnel file from 3 years ago, from your time at Apex Freight, before you landed your marketing career." Preston went still. The color left his face in an instant, leaving him looking like wet ash. He knew exactly what was inside that envelope. He had spent 3 years believing that secret was buried deep in some corporate archive. "You always told everyone you were exceptional at that job." I went on opening the envelope and pressing the first page to the glass. "You told Celeste you left because a rival firm came after you. You told your mother you had outgrown the role. You walked through every room like you were the smartest person in it." I turned the page. "But the truth is, you were fired, Preston. Fired for embezzlement. $200,000. You siphoned funds from vendor accounts into a shell company you created yourself. You thought you were clever. You believed they would never catch the rounding errors. They did." Preston began shaking his head. No, Dad. Don't." "They were going to press charges," I said, not stopping. "They were prepared to send you to federal prison for 10 years. They had the FBI ready to pick you up." I leaned closer to the glass. "Who do you think stopped them?" Preston stared at me, his eyes wide with something close to horror. "It was not your charm, Preston. It was me. The CEO of Apex Freight is an old friend from my steel mill days. He called me before he called the police. He told me my son was a thief. He asked me what I wanted to do." I paused, letting the memory settle back over me. The shame I had carried that day was heavier than any pain I had ever known. "I wired them $200,000 the next morning," I said. "I liquidated my retirement portfolio. I sold a piece of land I had been setting aside for your inheritance. I paid back every cent you stole, plus interest, plus a donation to their charitable fund to purchase their silence. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I had your record wiped clean so you could find another job, so you could have a fresh start. I watched it land on him. He had moved through life believing he was untouchable, that his talent was a shield. He had looked down on me as a simple laborer, while I was quietly buying his freedom with the very fortune he despised. I never told you," I said, my voice tightening, "because I wanted you to learn. I thought a second chance would make you better. I thought if I saved you without fanfare, you would finally grow up. But you did not grow up. You just learned to hide your rot more carefully. You took that second chance and used it to spit in my face. You used the freedom I bought you to mock the life I built." "You knew," Preston whispered. "You knew the whole time." "I knew everything," I said. "I knew when you bought the Breitling Navy timer. I knew when you lied about your salary. I knew when you met Celeste and started performing as old money. I watched you build a castle on a foundation of lies that I paid for. And I waited. I waited for you to become a man. You never did. You just became a more expensive child." I closed the file. "That $200,000 was your inheritance, Preston. That was your safety net. That was the money meant to buy you a house or launch a business. You burned it 3 years ago to stay out of prison. You spent it on your freedom, and now that account is empty. Preston slid down the wall of the booth until he was sitting on the floor. He looked small, he looked shattered, but this time I felt no pull to put him back together. The part of me that was a father had died the night he threatened to keep my grandchild from me. The man on the other side of that glass was just a criminal I used to know. I got to my feet. My knees cracked. I felt light. The secret I had carried for 3 years had finally been released into the open. That weight was no longer mine to bear. "Dad, please." Preston's voice floated up from the floor receiver, still pressed to his ear. "I am sorry. I did not know. You have millions. You can still help me. Just one more time." I looked down at him. Even now, stripped of everything, he was calculating what I had left. He couldn't see the sacrifice. He only ever saw the balance. "I do not have millions for you, Preston," I said. "You said I hid my money from you. You said I was selfish, but I did not hide it. I used it. I used it to cover your rent. I used it to clear your credit cards. I used it to keep you out of federal prison. I used it to clean up the wreckage you called your life for 32 years. I set the receiver back on the hook. It clicked into place with the sound of something final. I bent down toward the small metal grate in the glass. "But I am retired now, son. The cleanup service is closed. The bank is closed. The daddy service is closed. You made this mess. You sit in it. You clean it up." I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. "Dad," Preston's voice came through the glass, muffled and fraying. "Dad, do not walk away. Come back, Dad." I did not look back. I pushed through the door and stepped out into the corridor. The air was still stale, but it tasted like freedom to me. I walked past the guard station, past the other visitors, past the weeping mothers and the furious wives. I walked out into the full brightness of the parking lot, got into my rental car, and checked my phone. There was a message from Reginald. The civil suits against Celeste's parents were ready to file. Foreclosure proceedings on their home had been initiated. I started the engine. I had one more stop to make, one more thread to pull tight. But as for Preston, his chapter with me was finished. He was exactly where he belonged, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. 2 weeks after I left my son in that jail cell, the shockwaves from his wreckage finally rolled onto the shores of the Whitmore estate in Virginia. Lawrence and Nadine Whitmore, the people who had enforced black-tie dress codes while surviving on borrowed money, had finally run out of road. They had staked everything on Preston. They had swallowed his lies because they needed his imaginary Permian Basin oil money to prop up their failing hospitality group. When the truth detonated on national television that Preston was a fraud and that I was the one holding the actual purse strings, their whole structure came down at once. The banks moved in like sharks that had picked up the scent. Foreclosure notices were nailed to the gates of their ancestral home. Their cars were repossessed in the small hours of the night. Celeste had escaped to Europe with a wealthy companion, leaving her parents to face the wreckage alone. But desperation sharpens the mind. Lawrence started digging. He hired a forensic accountant with the last of his pawned watch money to map out exactly what I was worth. He found the shell companies. He found Clifford Graydon Holdings. He found the property deeds. He realized that the black steelworker he had turned away from his daughter's wedding was actually a real estate operator with enough liquid capital to purchase his entire neighborhood outright. That realization must have tasted like ash. But pride is the first thing to dissolve when homelessness is on the horizon. They rang my lawyer Reginald Holt every day for a week. They fired off emails expressing regret over the misunderstanding at the wedding. They claimed to be victims of Preston's deceptions as well. They invoked family, all of us bound together by shared tragedy, they said. They begged for a meeting. I let them sweat for 10 days. I let them watch the moving trucks sitting idle down the street. I waited until the sheriff was scheduled to execute the eviction order. Then I told Reginald to grant them an audience. I wanted to watch them beg. I wanted to see the people who had decided they were above me come to my table and ask for a crumb. The meeting was held in the main conference room at Holt and Associates. It was a room built to unsettle floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline, a mahogany table longer than a bowling alley. I sat at the head of it in a bespoke suit that cost more than Lawrence's car. Reginald sat to my right, silent and immovable. When the Whitmores came through the door, they looked hollowed out. Lawrence had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His suit was creased, his hands unsteady. Nadine looked fragile, all that haughty bearing replaced by a nervous flutter in her left eye. They stopped just inside the doorway, waiting to be told they could enter. The power in that room had rearranged itself so thoroughly that even the air felt different. "Mr. Graydon," Lawrence said, his voice catching. "Thank you for seeing us. We are so terribly sorry for everything." "Please sit," I said, gesturing toward the chairs at the far end of the table. They took their seats, hands clasped together. They delivered a rehearsed speech about how Preston had manipulated them, that they were decent people who had simply exercised poor judgment. They spoke of heritage and legacy. They spoke of how their home had remained in the Whitmore family across 4 generations. "We are in a temporary cash flow situation," Nadine said, her voice wavering. "The banks are being unreasonable. They are threatening to take the house over a bridge loan. We simply need a little time to restructure." "How much do you need, Lawrence?" I asked, cutting through all of it. Lawrence swallowed. He looked at the table, then at me. $2.5 million, he whispered. "Just to settle the immediate liens and stop the auction. We can repay you with interest once the market recovers. We only need a bridge loan. We are asking you as family." I settled back in my leather chair. Family. They had called me a dirty laborer. They had plastered my face on a sign to keep me out. Now I was family the moment I opened my wallet. "I'm not going to give you a loan, Lawrence," I said, my voice level. Nadine choked back a sob. Lawrence buried his face in his hands. But I went on. "I am willing to step in with the bank." Their heads lifted, hope igniting in their eyes, the way a struck match flares in a dark room. "Really?" Lawrence managed. "Yes," I said. "I have a working relationship with the vice president at the bank carrying your mortgage. We've done business before. I can intervene. I can make sure the foreclosure is stopped today." "Oh, thank you," Nadine wept. "Thank you, Clifford. We always knew you were a decent man. We knew you'd understand what legacy means." Reginald slid a document across the length of the table. It was a single page, thick, substantial. "Sign this authorization," I said. "It grants my company, Clifford Graydon Holdings, the right to negotiate directly with the bank on your behalf concerning the deed to your property. The moment you sign, I will wire the funds to the bank. The sheriff's order will be pulled. You will not be removed from this house today." They didn't so much as glance at the text. They were that desperate that, flooded with relief, they snatched the pen and scratched their signatures with trembling hands. They believed they had won. They thought they had worked the simple old man into pulling them back from the edge. They thought they were safe. I watched them sign. I watched them exchange a glance of quiet triumph. They had no idea they had just countersigned their own undoing. Lawrence passed the paper back to Reginald. He rose from his chair and thrust out his hand. "You've saved us, Clifford," he said, his eyes wet. "You're a true gentleman. We will never forget what you've done." I didn't rise. I didn't take his hand. "Sit down, Lawrence," I said. "We are not finished." Lawrence froze. He lowered himself slowly back into his seat. Reginald lifted his phone and placed a call. 2 words came out of his mouth. "Execute it." I turned my gaze to the Whitmores. "I told you I would halt the foreclosure," I said. "And I did. I just wired $2.5 million to your lender. I purchased the note." Nadine's smile was uncertain. "That's wonderful, then. So, we repay you instead of the bank. What are your terms?" "There are no terms." "Nadine," I said, "I didn't lend you the money. I bought the debt. That makes me the bank now. I hold the mortgage. And since you are currently 12 months in arrears and in default of the original agreement, I am exercising my right as the lien holder." I nodded to Reginald. He produced a second document. This one was read aloud. "This is a notice of acceleration and immediate repossession," Reginald said, pushing it across the table. "Since the prior owner failed to cure the default, the new note holder, Clifford Graydon Holdings, is taking title to the property effective immediately." Lawrence's face drained of color. He shoved back from the table, toppling his chair. "You cannot do this," he shouted. "You said you were going to help us." "I did help you," I said. "I spared you the spectacle of a public auction. This is a private transfer." "You deceived us," Nadine shrieked. "You stole our home." "I purchased your home," I corrected. "I paid fair market value for a distressed asset. It is business, Lawrence, the same kind of business you tried to conduct with my son." "But where are we supposed to go?" Lawrence stammered. "That house is everything to us." "You have 1 week," I said. 1 week to collect your personal belongings. Anything remaining after 7 days becomes the property of Clifford Graydon Holdings. I rose and crossed to the window, looking out over the city. And Lawrence, I said, my back still to them, don't lose sleep over the property's legacy. I have considerable plans for it. What plans? He whispered. I'm donating it, I said, turning to face them. The paperwork with the city is already filed. The Whitmore estate will be renovated and reopened next month. It will become the new Clifford Graydon Center for underprivileged minority youth. The room went absolutely still. I watched the weight of it land on them. Their ancestral home, the emblem of their white upper-class exclusion, was going to be turned into a refuge for the very children they had looked down upon. It would carry the name of the black man they had tried to bar from their door. No, Nadine whispered, sliding to the floor. You cannot. It is done, I said. The sign goes up Monday. I made sure to order a large one. Red letters, same as the one you had made for me. Get out of my office. They walked out in silence, gutted and beaten. They had lost everything, their money, their home, their legacy, and they had lost it to the man they once decided wasn't fit to cross their threshold. I watched them exit the building from my window. They looked very small from up here. I picked up my phone and called Henrietta. It's finished, Etta, I said. The house is ours. I heard a long, slow breath on the other end. Come home, Cliff, she said. Dinner's on. I'm on my way, I said. I closed my briefcase. I walked out of the office and left the lights dark behind me. The war was over. The enemy had been put down, and I had a legacy to build, one rooted in truth, not deception. One that would endure. The sun over the Aegean does not scorch the way the sun over the steel mill used to. It warms you. It settles deep into your bones and tells you that you have come through the winter. I sat on the aft deck of the Lady Henrietta, a 60-foot yacht I'd bought with cash 3 months ago. The water around us ran a deep, impossible blue, stretching out to meet the sky in one unbroken line. For 40 years I had kept my wealth tucked away like something to be ashamed of, buried under canvas work shirts and an old Chevy truck. I told myself I was shielding my family from what money does to people. I told myself I was modeling humility. But I learned the hard way that keeping your light hidden doesn't help anyone find their way. It only means you're stumbling in the dark alongside them. So, we stopped hiding. I looked across the deck at Henrietta. She stood at the railing, her eyes on the coastline of Greece. She wore a white linen dress and a wide-brimmed hat, and she looked every inch a queen. The doctor had said her heart would always be fragile. But watching her now, you'd never guess she had nearly slipped away from me on our living room floor. The fear had left her eyes, the invisible weight she'd carried in her shoulders for years. The hunch of a woman bracing for the next blow was gone. She was radiant. She was the woman I'd loved 50 years ago, but tempered now, made stronger. She had walked through that fire beside me and come out the other side, forged in steel. We had sold the house in the suburbs. We sold the memories of the brick through the glass and the nights we cried into the dark. We kept the Graydon Center running naturally. I brought on a full staff to oversee the youth programs at the old Whitmore estate. Every month the reports come in, kids landing scholarships, kids pulled off the streets, kids finding something like hope in a house that was built on keeping people out. It is the best investment I have ever made, but we don't live there. We live out here in the wind, the sun, the peace we bled for. I took a sip of my wine. It was a vintage red that cost more per bottle than my weekly wage at the mill ever did. It tasted like victory. I watched Henrietta turn and smile at me. She walked over and settled into the chair across from mine. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was warm. You're quiet today, Cliff, she said. Just thinking, Etta, I said, about how far we've come. She nodded, looking down at our joined hands. The silence between us was a comfortable thing now, no longer filled with the static of words never spoken, or the tension of waiting for the next catastrophe to arrive. But there was still one ghost that moved across the deck with us. One shadow the Aegean sun couldn't quite drive out. Do you miss him? She asked softly. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. I looked out at the water. I watched a seagull drop and rise again with a fish in its beak. The cycle of things, the predator, the prey. I miss the boy, I said, my voice holding steady. I miss the 5-year-old who'd come running to the door when I got home from shift covered in soot. I miss the 10-year-old who begged me to teach him how to throw a curveball. I miss what I thought he was becoming, Etta. I miss the future I believed we were building together. I tightened my grip on her hand. But I don't miss the man he turned into, I said. I do not miss the liar. I do not miss the thief. I do not miss the person who looked at you and saw a ledger balance instead of a mother. Henrietta let out a sigh, half grief, half resignation. I worry about him sometimes, she admitted. In that place, he is where his choices put him, I said. We didn't send him there. Etta, his greed sent him there. His arrogance sent him there. If we had pulled him out again, if we had let him walk away clean, he would have torn us apart. He would have bled us down to nothing, then stepped over what was left to find his next victim. I held her gaze. It was a tumor, Etta, a malignancy attached to our family. You don't keep a tumor because it grew from your own flesh. You remove it so the rest of the body can survive. We removed it, and here we are, alive. She nodded slowly, one tear tracing a line down her cheek. She brushed it away before it could fall far. You're right, she said. We are alive, and we are together. Then a sharp buzzing shattered the quiet, a harsh mechanical tremor rattling against the teakwood surface of the table. I glanced down, my phone. It sat there shaking with stubborn insistence, demanding attention in the middle of paradise. I reached for it. The screen blazed bright against the sunlight. The caller ID carried no name, only a location. State Correctional Facility. Collect call. It was Tuesday calling day. I stared at the screen. I could picture him on the other end, standing in the inmate queue, gripping that plastic receiver, waiting for the tone to sound. He'd be thinner by now, harder maybe, or just more cornered. He would want to tell us he was sorry. He would want to ask for commissary money. He would want to know if we were coming. He would want to drag us back down into the muck with him. He wanted a connection. He wanted the rope thrown back down. I looked over at Henrietta. She had seen the screen. She knew exactly who it was. Her breath caught for just a moment. The mother in her wanted to pick up. The mother in her wanted to hear that voice one more time. But then her eyes moved to me. They moved to the peace we had built around us. They moved to the scars she carried in her own chest. She reached across and laid her hand over mine. Then she shook her head. No more Cliff, she whispered. No more. I nodded. I didn't decline the call. I didn't silence it. I got up from my chair. I walked to the railing at the edge of the deck. The wind pushed hard against my shirt. Below, the ocean heaved and rolled, that deep, boundless blue that consumes everything it takes. The phone was still trembling in my hand, the pulse of a life already gone. I looked at the screen one final time. Goodbye, son, I thought. I opened my fingers. The phone tumbled out into the open air. It caught the sunlight for a brief instant, metal and glass, and the weight of everything we had lived through. Then it struck the water with a small, unremarkable splash. Gone in an instant, swallowed by the boat's wake. I kept my eyes on that spot until we had left it far behind, until there was nothing left to see but open water and white foam dissolving into blue. I turned back toward my wife. I crossed to the table, lifted my wine glass, then picked up hers and held it out to her. She took it, her hand not wavering. To us, I said. To the life we built and the peace we earned. Henrietta smiled, and this time it climbed all the way to her eyes. To us, she said. We clinked the glasses. The note rang out clear and bright above the sound of the water. We drank. The wine was sweet. The sun was warm. And for the first time in longer than I could name, the silence was genuinely empty. No more ghosts walking the deck. No more debts pulling at our ankles. Just the horizon stretching out ahead, and the two of us pointed straight toward it. The past was at the bottom of the ocean. The future was right here on this deck. I am Clifford Graydon. And that is where I will leave it. Two people sailing toward a horizon that not long ago neither of us believed we would live to see. I want to be honest with you about what this cost. It cost me a son, or at least the idea of the son I thought I had raised. It cost Henrietta years of quiet suffering she never deserved. The road back to peace was longer and harder than any business deal I ever negotiated. But I believe God does not waste the painful seasons. He uses them to strip away everything that was never real, and what is left standing afterward, that is what you were always meant to be. If you are in the middle of your own fight right now, whether you are part of the adults 50-plus generation who has spent decades building something only to watch someone try to tear it down, or you are someone who has just recognized a pattern in a person you trusted, hear me when I say this, your story is not over. Here is what this family revenge story taught me. and what I hope it leaves with you. Do not measure your power by what others can see. The most dangerous strength is the kind that stays quiet. If someone shows you they value your money more than your name, believe them the first time. Do not wait for a second demonstration. Protect what you built. Legacy is not inherited, it is defended deliberately every single day. And when it is finally over, let it be over. Drop it in the ocean and sail forward. Holding on to the wreckage does not honor what you survived, it just keeps you from reaching the shore. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear that it is not too late to reclaim what is theirs. Leave a comment and tell me what landed hardest for you. And if you have not yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, there are more of these waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.